The film begins at a crowded racetrack where a young Dominic Toretto watches from the sidelines as his father competes against a lineup of roaring stock cars. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, the shine of Dom's familiar necklace catches the light. When the car rolls into the pit lane, it becomes clear that the year is 1989, and we are introduced to Dom's father, Jack Toretto. Members of the crew voice their concerns about the dangerous conditions of the race, while Jakob works intensely beneath the hood, making last-minute adjustments. Dom remains nearby, doing whatever he can to support his father. Soon, Jack climbs back into his car and rejoins the race, unaware that something has gone terribly wrong. The competition is intense, filled with speed, skill, and tension. But suddenly, everything changes. Another driver collides with Jack's vehicle, sending it violently spinning before it flips through the air. Within seconds, the wreck bursts into flames. Dom runs toward the crash site in desperation, hoping to reach his father in time. Tragically, he arrives too late. Helpless, he can only watch as the fire consumes the wreckage and takes Jack's life. Years later in the present day, Dom lives a quieter life with his young son, Brian. He spends his time teaching the boy about engines and cars, passing down the knowledge he once learned from his own father. Letty soon joins them, but their peaceful moment is interrupted when a car suddenly approaches their secluded home. Instinctively, Dom tells Brian to hide while he prepares himself in case the visitor is a threat. Instead of danger, Roman steps out of the vehicle and announces that the arrival is friendly. Moments later, Ramsay and Tej pull up as well. They explain that contacting Dom and Letty had been nearly impossible since neither of them uses a phone. The group then plays an urgent transmission sent by Mr. Nobody. According to the message, his plane was attacked during flight. Ramsay admits she hasn't fully decrypted the data yet, but the message was clearly directed only to their team. Letty asks why they would be contacted specifically, and the others reveal that Mr. Nobody had been transporting Cypher as a prisoner. However, the aircraft was ambushed mid-flight by unknown forces attempting to free her. The team believes the plane eventually crashed somewhere in Monteinto. Tej insists they need to investigate and possibly rescue Mr. Nobody, but Dom unexpectedly shuts down the idea. To everyone's surprise, especially Letty, he says that he and Letty have left that life behind. Roman argues that this mission could finally lead them to the person responsible for Alina's death, yet Dom refuses to change his mind. Tej then informs everyone that the group will depart at 8 the next morning, leaving the option open in case Dom and Letty reconsider. Later that night, Dom and Letty tuck Brian into bed. Before leaving the room, Letty removes her necklace and places it in Dom's hand, quietly saying goodbye as she prepares to join the others. She explains that their path is different from the life Brian and Mia now live. After she leaves, Dom sits alone and watches the transmission again. This time, he notices something important in the footage, a necklace that looks extremely familiar. Realizing what it might mean, he immediately changes his mind. Just before the plane departs, Dom arrives to join the rest of the crew. In Monteinto, Spain, the team ventures deep into a restricted zone where Mr. Nobody's aircraft is believed to have crashed. Ramsay warns everyone that they must act quickly because the area is heavily controlled by the military. When they finally locate the wreckage, there are no survivors in sight. Instead, they discover a strange piece of equipment that appears to be responsible for broadcasting the distress signal. Before they can examine it further, military forces suddenly ambush the team. During the chaos, Letty manages to conceal the mysterious device on her motorbike before everyone speeds away from the crash site. Roman becomes separated from the group and finds himself surrounded by dozens of soldiers, forcing him to fight them off on his own. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew manages to escape. Just when it seems like Roman might be left behind, he unexpectedly catches up with them. As they race across the terrain, the group approaches a dangerous minefield. Dom asks how fast they need to drive in order to avoid triggering the explosives. Tej quickly calculates that they must reach around 130 kilometers per hour. The vehicles accelerate through the hazardous area, while the pursuing military vehicles slow down and retreat. Mines begin exploding all around them, yet none of the blasts strike directly. From a distance, an unknown figure silently observes the chaos. Roman's truck, however, struggles to keep up with the required speed. When it hits a mine, the explosion ignites the vehicle. A second blast sends the truck flying through the air, ultimately wedging it tightly between two massive rocks. Tej attempts to help Roman, but he quickly realizes the truck is balanced directly on top of another armed mine. With incredible determination, Roman forces open the windshield and carefully climbs out. Despite the danger beneath him, he manages to escape without triggering the explosive. For a moment it appears the truck might crush him, but once again Roman survives by the narrowest margin. At the same time, Dom and Letty search desperately for an escape route. Suddenly, a group of armed attackers blocks their path. Dom manages to overpower one of them, but another vehicle crashes into Letty and knocks her off her motorcycle. Reacting instantly, Dom slides his car underneath her falling body, catching her before she hits the ground. Then the mysterious figure who had been watching earlier finally emerges from the trees and grabs the strange device. Dom and Letty immediately recognize him. The man standing before them is Jakob. Dom and Letty quickly pursue him as Jakob speeds toward a nearby cliff. Meanwhile, Tej and the others attempt to cross a narrow wooden bridge, but another vehicle slams into the structure and causes it to collapse. Even though it appears they might fall straight into the canyon below, they somehow manage to reach the opposite side. Military helicopters soon arrive and begin firing on both Dom and Jakob, but neither of them slows down. In a bold move, Jakob deliberately drives his car off the edge of the cliff. Just as the vehicle falls through the air, a plane swoops in and captures the car using a specialized hook. Under heavy gunfire, Dom approaches the broken bridge. With no other option available, he uses a dangling pillar to latch onto his car, swinging across the massive gap like a pendulum. The landing is rough, but Dom successfully makes it to the other side. The landing is harsh, but the team finally manages to lose the pursuing military forces. Later on, inside a transport aircraft, the group meets Stasiak, who explains that reports of a crashed spy plane inside a hostile nation are already creating political complications. He agrees to transport them wherever they need to go next, but he makes it clear he won't get involved in any operations beyond flying them there. As the crew discusses their next move, Ramsay reveals that she has managed to decrypt additional coordinates hidden within the encrypted file. Letty then turns to Dom and quietly asks whether he already knew Jakob would appear there. Tej, puzzled, asks the obvious question, who exactly is Jakob? Letty explains the truth. Jakob is Dom's brother. The revelation shocks everyone. None of them had ever heard Dom mention having a brother, especially not one capable of pulling off something as complex as what they just witnessed. As Roman continues rambling about the situation, Dom's mind drifts back to the past. He remembers the day of the accident and how differently Jakob reacted compared to him. While Dom was crushed by grief, Jakob seemed strangely calm, almost distant. A few days after their father's death, the Toretto family went to complete some legal paperwork. While Dom focused on signing documents, Jakob spotted Kenny, the racer whose collision had caused the fatal crash. Jakob walked up to him and told him to leave. Kenny immediately recognized the Toretto name and mocked him, calling him Jack Toretto's worthless kid. Anger began to build inside Jakob. He grabbed a wrench, intending to scare Kenny away. Kenny tried to smooth things over, but during his apology, he hinted that Jack had known his risky racing style would eventually get him killed. That comment pushed Jakob too far. Dom rushed over to intervene, but instead of calming the situation, Dom himself swung the wrench and struck Kenny. The altercation led to Dom being arrested. It's a moment that has lingered in Jakob's memory ever since. In the present day, Jakob meets with Otto, who congratulates him for successfully using the magnet system to recover the device from Mr. Nobody's crashed aircraft. Inside their secret facility, Cypher is being held inside a reinforced glass cell equipped with advanced technology. She compliments Jakob on his precision, pointing out how he managed to extract her without leaving so much as a scratch. Then she begins to subtly play with his emotions, suggesting that he has spent his entire life living in Dominic's shadow. Clearly uncomfortable with her attempts to manipulate him, Jakob quickly changes the subject. He reveals the disk he recovered and hands Cypher an old computer, ordering her to locate the second half of Project Aries. He warns her not to attempt hacking anything else beyond that task. Within seconds, Cypher manages to identify the location. She casually remarks that retrieving it should be easy, unless Dominic happens to interfere. Meanwhile, near the Caspian Sea, Dom and the rest of the crew infiltrate an abandoned military base. Dom admits he barely recognizes the person Jakob has become and has no idea what his brother's ultimate goal might be. Despite that, he insists that confronting Jakob is something he must do on his own. The rest of the team immediately refuses that idea, reminding him that they have always faced every mission together and they aren't about to abandon him now. Later, while preparing for the mission, Roman jokingly starts theorizing that maybe they're actually indestructible. After all, they've survived countless missions and impossible situations without suffering any real injuries. Letty joins Dom as they prepare their weapons, and the two of them quietly admit that, in a strange way, they missed the adrenaline that came with their old life. Not long after, Tej announces that Mia has arrived. Letty had already informed her about Jacob's return. Dom warns Mia that getting involved again could put everything she has built at risk. But Mia reassures him that both her children and Dom's son are completely safe. Brian is watching over them, which is exactly why she wants to help this time. Ramsay then gathers everyone and presents information about Project Aries. She explains that Aries is an advanced system designed to control any network or device that operates on code. If the system connects to a satellite, whoever controls it could gain control over global weapon systems and effectively reshape the balance of power across the world within minutes. Understanding how dangerous such a tool could be, Mr. Nobody separated the prototype into two separate components, each requiring its own activation code. Since Jakob already possesses one half, the team's objective now is to locate the activation code before he does. Dom proposes splitting into separate groups if they want any chance of staying ahead of Jakob. Tej adds that Mr. Nobody's transmission also referenced a specific name connected to the code, someone linked to Han's supposed death. Letty and Mia immediately prepare to investigate. Just before they leave, Dom pulls Mia aside. He tells her that on the day Han died, he received a photograph from Mexico that strangely carried a Tokyo postmark, suggesting that something important had ended there. Mia asks what Dom plans to do about Jakob. Dom answers simply, he's going to find him. As Dom prepares for what lies ahead, another memory surfaces. He recalls his time in prison, where he worked in a repair shop alongside Santos and Leo, two men who eventually became his friends. One day they warned him about a crack in a fuel line. If air slipped inside, the engine would start choking. They explained that it was a common sabotage trick used in racing. If the crack widened even slightly, the entire car could explode. The explanation stuck with Dom, making him rethink what might have happened during his father's final race. After Dom was eventually released from prison, he attended an underground street race. The crowd cheered loudly for Jakob, who had become a skilled driver and was no longer overshadowed by his older brother. Dom hadn't expected to face him again so soon, but he challenged Jakob to a race. The stakes were simple. If Jakob won, he could come back home, but if he lost, he would have to leave and never return. Just before the race started, Dom confronted him with the truth. He revealed that he knew Jakob had tampered with their father's engine, because Jakob was the last person who had worked on the car that day. With the truth finally spoken, the two Toretto brothers lined up side by side at the starting line. A young woman stepped forward and dropped the flag, signaling the beginning of the race that would forever change both of their lives. Both brothers slam the nitrous buttons at the same moment, engines roaring as their cars surge forward. But Jakob fires his boost too soon. The sudden burst of power throws off his control, causing his car to fishtail. Dom seizes the opportunity, maintaining his line and racing ahead. He crosses the finish line first, claiming victory. Jakob, however, doesn't slow down. Instead, he keeps driving straight into the darkness, disappearing down the road without looking back. In the present day, Dom travels back to the old racetrack, hoping to find someone who might know where Jakob is now. The place looks almost frozen in time. The same cracked asphalt and weathered stands standing exactly as Dom remembers them. Buddy, however, has clearly grown older. After exchanging greetings, Dom asks about Jakob, knowing that Buddy took the younger Toretto in after Dom forced him to leave. Buddy explains that the worst punishment you can give a Toretto is to strip away their family. He reminds Dom that despite everything, Dom still has people who care deeply about him. Jakob, on the other hand, has spent years alone. Buddy warns Dom that if he and Jakob cross paths again, the encounter might not end well for either of them. One of them may not walk away from it. Dom thanks Buddy for looking after his brother all those years ago, but Buddy tells him the past can't stay buried forever. If Dom wants any chance at a future, he'll have to come to terms with what happened long ago. Before Dom leaves, Buddy shares the only piece of information he has. Jakob has been seen in London. He wishes Dom luck and hopes that somehow he'll find the piece he's been searching for. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Letty and Mia arrive in Tokyo hoping to uncover clues connected to Han. Sitting together over dinner, Mia admits that after Dom forced Jakob to leave, she actually kept in touch with him for a while. Then one day, he simply vanished without explanation. Mia asks Letty how she's handling everything. Letty admits that once she regained her memories, she felt compelled to confront the chaos surrounding her life. Facing it head-on was the only way she could find peace. She also confesses something that has been bothering her lately. Every time someone approaches the house, little Brian instinctively hides. Seeing that kind of fear in a child troubles her deeply. Suddenly, Letty remembers something Han once told her. According to him, Tokyo was like the Mexican border for people trying to disappear from the United States. At that exact moment, Letty notices a Mexican flag hanging in the window of a nearby apartment. Elsewhere, in Germany, Sean, Twinkie, and Earl have managed to get official approval to build rocket engines, though mostly because someone paid enough money to make it happen. The trio, however, can't seem to agree on anything as they argue endlessly about their designs. Their heated debate is interrupted when Roman and Tej suddenly appear. Sean excitedly introduces them to their latest invention, a car equipped with a remotely operated rocket engine. To demonstrate the system, they test the vehicle by racing it alongside a plane preparing for takeoff. Sean, Twinkie, and Earl cheer enthusiastically as the car speeds down the runway, leaving Roman and Tej staring in total confusion. The demonstration ends abruptly when the car explodes in a massive fireball. Tej explains they've been sent by Dominic Toretto to find transportation for an upcoming mission. Sean and Twinkie instantly recognize the name Dom Toretto. Earl, however, looks completely lost, having no idea who Dom even is. Back in London, inside an upscale jewelry boutique, Magdalene Shaw casually helps herself to several expensive pieces. Alarms start blaring throughout the store, but she calmly walks outside and attempts to steal a getaway car. Before she can leave, Dom suddenly jumps into the passenger seat beside her. With police cars already closing in, the stolen vehicle speeds through London's crowded streets. During the chaotic chase, Dom explains that he's searching for someone with access to powerful resources. Magdalene mentions that an American connected to her crew recently purchased a massive stockpile of weapons for something major happening in Edinburgh. She adds that the man bears an uncanny resemblance to Dom. Dom calmly admits that the man she's referring to is his brother. The pursuit continues as Magdalene skillfully loses several police vehicles with an impressive driving maneuver. As they escape, she warns Dom that Jakob has placed a bounty on anyone capable of locating him. Eventually, they arrive outside a massive mansion where a luxurious party is taking place. Dom steps out of the car. Before he goes, Magdalene reminds him that nothing in the world is stronger than the bond of family. But when that love twists into hatred, it can become the most dangerous force imaginable. Dom walks through the extravagant gathering filled with luxury cars and glamorous guests until he comes face to face with Otto, Jacob's partner. Otto brags about his enormous wealth, explaining that his father rules an entire country as a dictator. Smiling arrogantly, he offers Dom some entertainment for the evening. Dom ignores him completely and heads straight toward Jakob. The moment Jakob notices him, he coldly says the brother Dom once knew no longer exists. Dom responds by saying he still sees the frightened kid who played a role in their father's death. Jakob fires back angrily, demanding that Dom leave, just like Dom forced him to do years ago. The confrontation escalates quickly until both men draw guns and aim them at each other. Suddenly, Interpol agents storm into the mansion. Otto smugly announces that he possesses diplomatic immunity. As the son of a head of state, he claims the mansion legally qualifies as an embassy. With that protection, the authorities can't touch him. Instead, the agents arrest Dom for attempted murder and take him into custody. While Dom is being transported away, Otto tells Jakob that they must prepare for their next move in Edinburgh, where the second half of Project Aries is located. They still need the activation code, but they're confident they're getting closer. Inside the transport vehicle, Dom is greeted by LSA, an old acquaintance who smiles at him. She secretly hands him a specialized weapon loaded with Jacob's biometric data, technology that will help Dom track his brother. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Letty and Mia enter the apartment marked by the Mexican flag. Inside, they discover a photograph showing Han standing beside a woman they've never seen before. Suddenly, a young woman named Elle appears. She calls out their names before immediately taking down the first armed intruder who enters the apartment. More attackers rush in, sparking a fierce fight between the women and the armed men. The battle grows intense, and for a moment it seems like Letty and Mia are about to be overwhelmed. Just then, Letty crashes through a window during the struggle. Before the attackers can finish them off, someone intervenes at the last second. Han. He steps forward and quickly eliminates the remaining enemies, saving them both. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, a mysterious package is being transported toward a heavily fortified high-security vault. Inside a church in Edinburgh, Otto quietly installs a device, while Dom waits nearby for updates from Ramsay. After a moment, Ramsay contacts him and explains that she used Jacob's fingerprints to track his current position. According to the data, Jakob and his team are somewhere close. But before she can say anything else, her computer suddenly begins malfunctioning. Screens flicker, systems freeze, and one by one the security cameras throughout the city shut down. At that exact moment, authorities receive a warning. Jakob had been hiding inside the very package that was transported to the high-security vault. Using the shipment as cover, he slipped inside the facility and stole the second half of the Aries device. Meanwhile, on the streets below, Roman and Tej continue scanning the area for their target. Roman suddenly notices a delivery rider who moves like a trained fighter. Without thinking twice, Roman tackles the man to the ground. Tej begins reporting what just happened, but suddenly the metal chain he's holding snaps forward and sticks to a passing truck. Both men immediately realize what's happening. There's a powerful electromagnet hidden inside the vehicle. The strange magnetic pull explains all the interference they've been experiencing. When Roman and Tej look toward the truck, they spot armed men inside. The strangers instantly point guns at them. At the same time, police units start flooding the surrounding streets. Dom quickly figures out that Jakob won't risk escaping through the crowded roads. Looking upward, he suddenly spots him moving across the rooftops. Meanwhile, Ramsay notices Otto leaving the church and decides to follow him. When Dom tells her to pursue the target, Ramsay hesitates and admits she actually doesn't know how to drive. But with the situation escalating, she doesn't have time to back out. Moments later, she finds herself sitting behind the wheel of a massive autonomous truck. Inside the cargo section, Tej and Roman watch as Ramsay takes control of the vehicle. Ramsay activates the truck's magnetic system, instantly pulling weapons and enemy vehicles away from their path. She floors the accelerator and races after Otto, while Tej and Roman fend off the attackers climbing into the truck. Above them, Dom continues chasing Jakob across the rooftops. At one point, Ramsay accidentally triggers the magnet again, yanking cell phones out of people's hands and dragging random metal objects through the streets toward the truck. Dom leaps out of his car and begins climbing a building, sprinting from one rooftop to the next. Meanwhile, inside the truck, Tej and Roman manage to defeat the last of the attackers during a chaotic fight in the cargo bay. Dom finally catches up to Jakob in midair. The two crash through the window of an apartment, immediately launching into a brutal hand-to-hand fight. While the brothers tear through the room, smashing furniture and breaking walls, Otto continues driving toward the point where Jakob plans to escape. Eventually, Jakob dives out of another window and lands on top of a moving bus. Dom refuses to let him get away. From the street below, Ramsay destabilizes Otto's vehicle just as Dom manages to shove Jakob off an overpass. Both brothers tumble down together and crash onto the roof of Ramsay's truck. Jakob quickly jumps into another car and attempts to flee again, but Ramsay activates the magnet one more time. The powerful pull drags Jakob's vehicle straight through nearby buildings as metal structures collapse around it. Later, Otto returns to his headquarters furious. He orders his men to gather the best drivers they have so they can hunt down Dominic Toretto. Cypher, still trapped in her glass cell, mocks him. She says this is exactly the moment when desperate villains begin making careless mistakes that allow heroes to win. She even hints that Otto might not be the one truly in control, that perhaps someone else is pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Jakob is transported to the team's base near the Caspian Sea and locked inside a secure cell by Dom's crew. Nearby, Tej and Ramsay examine the magnet technology, clearly impressed by its power. After teasing Roman for a moment, Letty and Mia suddenly arrive with an unbelievable revelation. Han is alive. The entire team rushes forward and embraces him, overwhelmed with relief. From inside his cell, Jakob quietly watches the reunion. The warmth and loyalty between them is something he never truly experienced. Later, Han explains how everything happened. After Giselle died, he felt completely empty and directionless. That's when Mr. Nobody approached him with an offer: steal a mysterious device from two scientists. However, Mr. Nobody intentionally left out a critical detail. Elle then continues the story. One Saturday, she returned home to grab her coat, only to witness her parents' car suddenly crash through the window and explode. Han had seen the explosion as well and rushed inside to help her. While trying to protect her from the attackers who arrived afterward, he was injured. From that moment on, Han took responsibility for teaching Elle how to survive, because she would always be a target. She is the key to Project Aries. The activation code for the system is encoded directly within her DNA, inherited from her parents. Han also reveals something else. At one point, Mr. Nobody warned him that one of his top agents might eventually betray him. When Deckard Shaw appeared, they used the chaos of that attack as an opportunity to fake Han's death. Suddenly, alarms begin blaring throughout the base. Otto's forces break in and quickly capture the team. Jakob calmly walks out of his cell, revealing the truth. He was the traitor inside Mr. Nobody's organization all along. That betrayal is how Otto managed to locate Dom so easily. Jakob announces that he now has everything he needs, including the activation code. After retrieving the second half of the Aries device, he turns to Dom and says that the best outcome of their father's death was that it finally allowed him to escape Dominic's shadow. Dom fires back immediately, saying the only good thing about that tragedy is that their father never lived long enough to see the person Jakob became. Furious, Jakob finally reveals the truth. Their father had planned to deliberately lose that final race because he was buried under massive debt. He asked Jakob to help sabotage the car so it would fail. Neither of them realized the vehicle would explode. Jakob promised his father he would keep the secret forever, and he honored that promise until now. With that confession revealed, Jakob leaves the base with Elle. Even hand cannot stop him. As soon as they're gone, Dom orders Ramsay to activate the magnet system. Instantly, every gun in the room is ripped from the attacker's hands. The magnetic force even pulls the pins from nearby smoke grenades, filling the area with thick clouds. Taking advantage of the chaos, the team begins fighting their way toward the exit, but the enemies close in quickly. Realizing they're about to be captured again, Dom makes a difficult decision. He chooses to stay behind. Dom seals the hatch behind him, choosing to confront the soldiers alone so they won't be able to reach the rest of his family. The enemy forces quickly surround him and force him down. Just as the door begins to open behind them, Dom finds a final burst of strength. He rises and grabs several of the soldiers, pulling them down with him as they tumble together. Dom plunges into the water below and sinks into the dark depths. When he loses consciousness, his mind drifts into a vivid memory. He hears his father's voice speaking to him and Jakob about the power of family when they stand united. He remembers how their father tried to shield them from the heavy burdens he carried himself. In the vision, Dom walks through a doorway and suddenly finds himself back at the racetrack. He watches a younger Jakob nervously following their father's instructions, unaware that those actions would eventually lead to tragedy. Dom relives the painful moment when he forced Jakob to leave, finally letting go of the anger he carried for so long. Suddenly the memory shatters. Dom snaps back to reality as Letty dives into the water and pulls him to safety. When Dom regains consciousness, he quietly thanks Letty for saving his life. Later, the team gathers to assess their situation. Jakob now possesses everything required to activate Project Aries. The only thing he still needs is a rogue satellite equipped with a signal amplifier powerful enough to broadcast the system worldwide. Stopping him won't be easy. They have no way to prevent the satellite launch itself. That means they'll have to deal with Jakob, his private army, and the satellite already heading into orbit, one that can only be hacked by physically accessing it. Dom and Letty remain confident they can handle it. Roman, however, begins to panic, pointing out that this mission is far beyond anything they've attempted before. When he asks if their plan involves stealing a space shuttle, the response he receives is surprisingly simple. Yes, meanwhile, in Tbilisi, Georgia, Jakob and Otto oversee preparations for the satellite launch. As they depart, they hand Elle the Aries device, which activates the moment it touches her hands. Jakob explains that once the satellite reaches orbit, the signal connection will begin. Elsewhere, Roman and Tej sit nervously inside a car that has been strapped to the underside of a plane. Sean and Earl occupy the cockpit and ask if they're ready for launch. Roman definitely isn't, especially since the vehicle they're sitting in is the same one that exploded during an earlier test. The pilots attempt to calm his nerves, though Earl continues running last-second calculations just to be sure everything will work. On the streets below, Dom and the rest of the crew prepare their attack on the convoy, transporting the Aries device along with Elle. Their objective is to disable the system before Roman and Tej reach the satellite. Jakob gives the command to begin transmitting the signal. At that moment, Roman and Tej are launched into the sky. The booster attached to their car ignites, propelling them upward into space. As they ascend, they stare back at Earth slowly shrinking beneath them. Meanwhile, on the ground, Otto's forces begin attacking Dom's team. What Otto's men didn't anticipate is that the crew's vehicles are equipped with powerful electromagnets, allowing them to manipulate nearby cars like weapons. Bullets fly as Dom slows down one of the pursuing enemy vehicles. Nearby, Letty and Ramsay activate their magnet and pull an entire truck toward them. Han and Mia latch onto another vehicle, climb inside, and fight their way through the guards in order to reach Elle. The soldiers have strict orders to eliminate them, but Mia and Han strike quickly, knocking them out with brutal efficiency. One surviving attacker escapes by parachute, but detonates a grenade in midair as he descends. Back on the massive armored truck carrying the device, the satellite antenna suddenly fails to receive the signal. Jakob climbs onto the roof of the moving vehicle to repair it himself. But one of Otto's soldiers follows him with instructions to eliminate him. Otto contacts Jakob, announcing that the device is functioning perfectly and revealing that he has secretly joined forces with Cypher. Jakob responds with contempt, calling Otto nothing more than a spoiled rich kid. He declares that he's finished working with him. The fight on top of the armored truck explodes into full force as Jakob battles Otto's soldier. The clash is so intense that nothing happening on the streets below can distract from their brutal struggle. Nearby, Dom and Letty activate their magnets and push two enemy vehicles aside, sending them briefly flying through the air. Both of them speed toward the massive truck. Dom sees Jakob being knocked down during the fight and quickly activates the magnet to pull him toward a nearby car instead of letting him slam onto the pavement. The vehicle crashes into Mia's car, but she manages to regain control and stabilize it before Jakob falls to the ground. Letty takes control of another vehicle and uses it to smash into one of Otto's pursuing soldiers. Jakob leaps into Han's car but quickly chooses to take a different route. Meanwhile, Otto attempts to reassure Cypher by updating her on the situation, but Dom's interference is clearly irritating her. Cypher decides she will personally put an end to the situation. Elle opens fire on the armored truck, but the bullets barely scratch the vehicle's heavy armor. Realizing they can't destroy it from the outside, the team comes up with a dangerous alternative. Using their magnets, they begin pulling dozens of nearby cars toward the truck from every direction, hoping to block its path. But even that might not be enough. If they fail now, everything will be lost. Dom turns to Letty and asks her to position her car alongside the armored truck. They're going to try something extreme. They're going to flip it. Both Dom and Letty steer their cars toward the truck's massive wheels, preparing to lift it with their magnets. But before Letty can get into position, a barrage of gunfire forces her to veer away. Out of nowhere, Jakob suddenly pulls up beside Dom. Without saying a word, he joins the effort. The two brothers align their vehicles near the front wheels and activate their magnets simultaneously, forcing the enormous truck to tilt upward from the back. For a moment, it actually begins to rise, but the strain quickly becomes overwhelming. The massive weight starts pushing down on their car, threatening to crush it completely. Realizing there's no time left, Jakob throws open the passenger door and leaps out. Dom reacts instantly. He reaches over, grabs Jakob, and drags him into his moving car just seconds before the crushing weight collapses where he was standing. Meanwhile, far above the Earth, Roman and Tej finally reach the satellite. They attempt to use their magnetic system to destroy it, but the equipment suddenly fails to respond. Roman quickly suggests another solution: ram the satellite directly. Tej immediately rejects the idea. Crashing into it could easily kill them both, or worse, leave them stranded in space without enough fuel to ever make it back. Roman looks at him seriously and tells him to have faith. Maybe their family wasn't truly invincible after all. Maybe they had simply been incredibly lucky. Back on the ground, Dom finally catches up to the convoy as the rest of the team moves in to support him. Up in orbit, Roman accepts the danger. If this is the end, he wants to face it with courage. Ramsay urges them forward from below. Time is almost gone. Tej finally hits the nitrous. Their car rockets forward and slams directly into the satellite, shattering it into pieces. Back on Earth, the crew abandons the massive armored truck. Just as Dom prepares to jump away from the vehicle, he notices an aircraft approaching rapidly. Cypher is piloting it. The moment she spots him, she immediately locks onto his position. Thinking quickly, Dom activates an explosive and launches it forward, forcing the truck to veer violently off its path. The huge vehicle rolls down a steep hillside as Dom struggles to keep control. Cypher responds by firing missiles that slam into the truck, flipping it yet again. At the last possible moment, Dom escapes the vehicle before it plunges over the edge of a cliff, colliding directly into Cypher's aircraft. But once again, Cypher survives. She reveals that the plane was never carrying her physically. She had been controlling it remotely the entire time. After the chaos settles, Jakob approaches Dom quietly and hands him the keys to his car. He warns Dom that from now on, a lot of powerful people will have their eyes on him. Dom admits that he hasn't always been perfect. The anger he carried toward Jakob blinded him to the truth. Instead of taking the keys back, Dom tells Jakob to keep the car, a small gesture showing that he's finally letting go of the past. Mia steps forward and wraps her brother in a long embrace. The siblings share an emotional farewell, promising that someday they'll see each other again. Weeks later, Dom brings his son to the old racetrack. He explains that this is the place where he last saw his father alive, and where he first learned the lessons that would shape the rest of his life. In one final memory, Dom recalls the moment after he confronted Kenny all those years ago. Back then he told Jakob that everything would work out. No matter how difficult things became, they would face it together as a family. Back in Los Angeles, Dom's home has been rebuilt. the family continues to grow, old friends return, and reunions once thought impossible begin to happen. During dinner, Santos mentions that Tigo has opened a restaurant nearby. Dom smiles and tells his son to thank them for the food. As everyone gathers around the table, there's one empty chair waiting. Suddenly, the familiar sound of a car engine approaches the house. Brian O'Connor has arrived. In the post-credit scene, Deckard Shaw is shown training intensely, throwing punches at a heavy bag. As the bag swings back and forth, it's revealed that a man is actually trapped inside it. Just then, someone knocks on Shaw's door. When he opens it, he freezes in shock. Standing there is someone he never expected to see. Analysis: what if the greatest enemy Dominic Toretto ever faced wasn't a criminal, a terrorist, or a rival driver, but his own brother? For more than 20 years, the Fast and Furious franchise has transformed from a small street racing movie into one of the biggest action sagas in cinema history. What started with underground races and nitrous boosts has evolved into globe-spanning missions, impossible stunts, and a team that treats loyalty like a sacred code. But F9. The Fast saga takes the story to a completely different level. This time, the danger isn't just about saving the world, it's about confronting the past. Dominic Toretto has always lived by one rule: family comes first. That belief has guided every decision he's made, every enemy he's fought, and every risk he's taken. But what happens when that same rule becomes the source of the conflict? In F9, Dom is forced to face a secret he buried long ago, a brother he never speaks about, a relationship destroyed by betrayal, and a past that refuses to stay hidden. As the story unfolds, that buried history explodes into the present, pulling Dom and his team into a battle that's bigger, more dangerous, and far more personal than anything they've faced before. The action is louder, the stakes are higher, and the truth about the Toretto family will change everything. So today, we're breaking down F9, the Fast saga, from its explosive story to the hidden details, the shocking twists, and the ending that reshapes the entire Fast and Furious universe. Let's start from the beginning. Before we dive into the explosive story of F9, the Fast saga, let's quickly understand what this movie actually is and where it fits in the Fast and Furious universe. Released in 2021 and directed by Justin Lin, the filmmaker behind some of the franchise's most popular entries, F9 is the ninth main chapter in the Fast and Furious saga. By this point, the series has come a long way from its street racing origins. What once began with illegal races and tuner cars has evolved into a full-scale global action franchise, blending high-speed driving with espionage, heists, and world-saving missions. F9 continues that tradition, only this time the scale is bigger than ever. The movie combines several genres at once. It's an action blockbuster, a spy thriller, and at its heart, still a story about family. The story picks up after the events of the previous film, where Dominic Toretto has stepped away from the dangerous life he once lived. He's trying to live quietly with Letty and raise his young son, leaving behind the chaos that followed him for so many years. But peace never lasts long in the Fast universe. Soon, a new global threat emerges involving a dangerous piece of technology capable of controlling the world's most powerful weapon systems. To stop it, Dom must once again reunite his crew and return to the life he tried to leave behind. But this mission isn't just another job, because the mastermind behind this new threat is someone Dom never expected to face again. His own brother, and that revelation turns this mission into the most personal battle Dom has ever fought. At first glance, F9, the Fast saga looks like pure adrenaline, fast cars, massive explosions, and gravity-defying stunts. But underneath all the spectacle, the movie is built on something much deeper, because F9 isn't just an action film, it's a story about family, betrayal, and redemption. Over the years, the Fast and Furious franchise has evolved from simple street racing into a full-scale action-adventure saga. In this film, that evolution continues with a mix of high-speed action, spy thriller elements, and global missions that push the story far beyond the streets where it all began. But the real heart of the movie lies in its themes. The most powerful theme, as always, is family. Dominic Toretto has spent his entire life protecting the people he calls family, his crew, his friends, and the people who stood by him through every battle. But in F9, that idea is challenged in the most personal way possible, because this time, the conflict comes from within the family itself. Dom's long-lost brother Jakob enters the story not just as a villain, but as someone shaped by the same past, the same father, and the same painful memories. And that leads to another major theme: betrayal. The movie explores how one moment from the past can create years of resentment, misunderstanding, and anger. For Dom and Jakob, their shared history becomes the emotional engine that drives the entire conflict. But alongside betrayal comes the possibility of redemption. Throughout the story, the characters are forced to confront their past decisions and ask a difficult question: can broken family bonds ever truly be repaired? Emotionally, the movie balances intense action with moments of reflection and humor, making it both explosive and surprisingly heartfelt. And that combination is exactly why the Fast and Furious series continues to resonate with audiences. Because beneath all the insane stunts and impossible action sequences, the story has always been about one simple idea: family is everything. The story of F9. The Fast saga begins in a place that almost feels unfamiliar for Dominic Toretto. Peace. After years of chaos, dangerous missions, and global battles, Dom has stepped away from that life. He's living quietly with Letty and raising his young son, trying to leave the past behind. But in the world of Fast and Furious, the past never stays buried for long. Everything changes when the team learns about a powerful and extremely dangerous technology known as Project Aries. If activated, this device would allow someone to control the world's military weapons systems, turning it into one of the most dangerous tools ever created. Naturally, Dom and his crew are pulled back into action. Their mission is simple in theory, but nearly impossible in reality: locate the pieces of the Aries device before they fall into the wrong hands. But as the team begins chasing the threat across the globe, they make a shocking discovery. The man behind the operation, the mastermind controlling everything from the shadows, is Jakob Toretto, Dom's brother, a brother he hasn't spoken about in years. As the story unfolds, the film begins revealing the painful history between them through a series of flashbacks. Years earlier, a tragic accident during a race led to the death of their father. Dom believed Jakob was responsible for that tragedy, a betrayal that tore the family apart forever. That moment changed both of their lives. Dom stayed behind and built the family we've seen throughout the franchise. Jakob disappeared and became something else entirely, an elite operative capable of taking on the entire crew by himself. Meanwhile, Dom's team spreads across multiple locations around the world, trying to stop Jakob's plan. Each mission brings them closer to assembling the truth about the past, and closer to a final confrontation that has been building for years. Because this isn't just another mission anymore. For Dom, it's personal, and sooner or later the two brothers will have to face each other. As the story of F9, the Fast saga races toward its explosive finale, everything comes down to one final confrontation. After chasing the pieces of the Aries device across the world, Dominic Toretto and his team finally arrive at the moment where everything must be decided. The powerful technology that could control global weapon systems is nearly complete, and if Jakob succeeds, the consequences could be catastrophic. But for Dom, this isn't just about stopping a global threat anymore. It's about facing the brother he lost. The final battle between Dom and Jakob Toretto isn't just physical, it's emotional. Years of anger, misunderstanding, and pain finally explode in a brutal showdown between the two brothers. For most of the fight, it seems like Dom and Jakob are still trapped in the past, reliving the same resentment that separated them years ago. But as the truth about their father's death and their shared history becomes clearer, something begins to change. Dom realizes that the story he believed for so long wasn't the full truth. And in that moment, the conflict stops being about revenge. Instead of destroying Jakob, Dom makes a different choice, one that reflects the core message of the entire Fast and Furious saga. He chooses family. The Aries device is ultimately destroyed, preventing it from being used as a weapon. The world is safe once again, but the real victory lies in the emotional resolution between the brothers. Jakob is given the chance to escape rather than be captured or killed, and that decision speaks volumes. Because for Dom, family isn't about perfection. It's about forgiveness, second chances, and the belief that even the most broken relationships can be repaired. The ending of F9 closes one chapter of the Toretto family story, but it also leaves the door open for what might come next. Because in the Fast and Furious universe, the road is never truly over. At first glance, F9. The Fast saga looks like pure blockbuster spectacle: massive explosions, impossible stunts, and cars doing things that seem to ignore the laws of physics. But beneath all that chaos, the movie hides a surprising number of small details, callbacks, and symbolic moments that longtime fans of the franchise will definitely notice. One of the most important elements is the flashbacks to Dom and Jakob's childhood. These scenes aren't just there to explain the story, they represent the emotional foundation of the entire conflict. The racing world they grew up in, the pressure from their father, and the tragic accident that changed everything all serve as symbols of how the past continues to shape the present. In many ways, those flashbacks show that both brothers were victims of the same tragedy, but they chose very different paths afterward. Another interesting detail involves the cars themselves, which have always played a symbolic role in the Fast and Furious universe. Dom's vehicles are usually powerful, raw muscle cars, machines that represent strength, loyalty, and tradition. Jakob, on the other hand, often uses more modern, high-tech vehicles. That contrast quietly reflects the difference between the two brothers. Dom relies on instinct and heart, while Jakob operates with precision and calculated control. The film also includes several Easter eggs for longtime fans of the series. Throughout the movie, there are subtle references to earlier chapters in the franchise, moments that remind viewers just how far this story has come since the original street racing days. Certain character appearances, familiar dialogue styles, and even specific car models act as small nods to the history of the Fast family. These hidden details reward viewers who have followed the franchise from the beginning. Because while F9 pushes the action to bigger and crazier levels than ever before, it never completely forgets where the story started. When you watch F9, the Fast Saga, it's easy to think the action is too insane to be real. Cars flying through the air, massive explosions, impossible stunts. It almost feels like everything must be CGI. But here's the surprising truth. A huge portion of the action in F9 was actually done using real stunts and practical effects. The Fast and Furious franchise has always been known for pushing the limits of what stunt teams can accomplish, and this movie takes that tradition even further. Some sequences required specially designed rigs, reinforced vehicles, and months of preparation just to make a few seconds of footage look believable. One stunt in particular involved a car being launched across a massive gap using a giant swing mechanism. Instead of relying entirely on computer effects, the production team built real structures to make the moment feel authentic on screen. And that's just one example. The movie was also filmed in multiple countries around the world, giving the story a truly global scale. From dense urban environments to remote landscapes, the crew traveled across several continents to capture the massive scope of the film's action scenes. Another interesting behind-the-scenes detail involves the actors themselves. Many of the cast members trained extensively for their roles, especially when it came to fight choreography and stunt coordination. While professional stunt performers handled the most dangerous moments, the actors still spent weeks learning how to move, react, and perform convincingly during intense action sequences. All of this effort contributed to one major reality about F9. It became one of the most expensive films in the entire Fast and Furious franchise. The massive sets, international filming locations, and large-scale action sequences pushed the production to blockbuster levels. But that investment is exactly what allowed the film to deliver the kind of spectacle fans expect from the series. Because in the Fast universe, the action always has to go bigger. And F9 proves that the franchise is still willing to push those limits further than ever before. To really understand F9, the Fast Saga, you have to look at how far the Fast and Furious franchise has come. When the first movie released back in 2001, the story was simple. It focused on underground street racing, car culture, and small-scale crime. The action was grounded, the stakes were personal, and the world of the film felt relatively realistic. But over the years, the series evolved. What started as a racing movie slowly transformed into a global action franchise filled with international missions, secret technology, and larger-than-life stunts. F9 represents one of the biggest leaps in that evolution. Compared to the earlier films, the scale here is enormous. Instead of street races through city blocks, the crew now faces threats capable of affecting the entire world. The action sequences are bigger, the technology is more advanced, and the story moves far beyond the underground racing scene where it all began. In many ways, the franchise now sits alongside other major action series that focus on globe-spanning adventures and elite teams handling dangerous missions. But despite these similarities, F9 still keeps something unique that separates it from other action franchises, and that's the focus on family. While many action movies revolve around spies, soldiers, or superheroes, the Fast and Furious series has always centered around a group of people bound together by loyalty rather than blood. Even in F9, with its massive action and near-impossible stunts, the emotional core remains the same. At the heart of the story is still Dominic Toretto and the family he refuses to abandon. That combination, ridiculous action mixed with strong emotional bonds, is exactly what makes the Fast and Furious saga stand out from the rest. When F9, the Fast Saga finally arrived in theaters, the reaction from audiences around the world was massive. After years of building momentum, the Fast and Furious franchise had become one of the biggest action brands in cinema. So naturally, expectations for the ninth installment were incredibly high, and for many fans, the movie delivered exactly what they wanted. Audiences loved the film's insane action sequences, massive set pieces, and the emotional storyline centered around the Toretto family. For longtime followers of the franchise, the exploration of Dom's past and the introduction of his brother Jakob added a new layer to a character they had been watching for nearly 2 decades. The movie also performed strongly at the global box office, proving that the Fast and Furious series still had enormous drawing power across the world, but the critical response was more mixed. Some critics praised the film for fully embracing its over-the-top style, arguing that the franchise had learned to lean into its own ridiculousness in the most entertaining way possible. Others felt the story had pushed the limits of realism too far, turning the action into something closer to fantasy than traditional blockbuster spectacle. And that debate sparked an interesting question among viewers. Has the Fast and Furious franchise become too big for its own good? Some fans love the wild, gravity-defying action. Others miss the simpler days of underground street racing. But regardless of the divided opinions, one thing became very clear after the release of F9. People are still talking about it, and any movie that can keep audiences debating, arguing, and revisiting the story long after the credits roll has clearly made an impact. So after all the explosions, impossible stunts, and emotional family drama, the big question remains: is F9, the Fast Saga, actually worth watching? The answer depends on what you expect from the Fast and Furious universe. If you're looking for pure realism, this movie probably isn't trying to give you that. By the time we reach the 9th installment, the franchise has fully embraced its identity as a larger-than-life action spectacle. And in that category, F9 absolutely delivers. One of the film's biggest strengths is its scale. The action sequences are enormous, creative, and often completely unpredictable. Every major set piece feels designed to push the limits of what the franchise can get away with. Another strong point is the deeper look into Dominic Toretto's past. For the first time, the story explores the history of the Toretto family in detail, giving fans new insight into the character who has been at the center of the saga for so many years. But the movie isn't perfect. At times, the story stretches logic to extreme levels, and some moments feel so over the top that they almost cross into fantasy. For viewers who prefer the grounded street racing tone of the earlier films, this shift might feel a little too far from the franchise's roots. Still, for fans of the series, F9 delivers exactly what they came for. Big action, returning characters, emotional moments, and the continuing story of a family that refuses to break apart. And that's really the key to the movie's appeal. Because no matter how wild the stunts become or how big the explosions get, the Fast and Furious saga has always been about one simple idea. Family comes first, and if you enjoy high-energy blockbusters filled with adrenaline, spectacle, and just the right amount of chaos, then F9, the Fast Saga, is definitely a ride worth taking. REVIWS. So let me start with a simple question. Why do people actually go to watch a Fast and Furious movie at this point? What are we really expecting when we walk into the theater for something like F9, the Fast Saga? Is it a carefully constructed story grounded in realism? Probably not. Is it a film that respects the laws of physics, gravity, or even basic logic? Definitely not. And honestly, by now the franchise isn't even pretending otherwise. Let's start with a simple question. When people buy a ticket for a Fast and Furious movie today, what are they actually expecting? Because by this point, nobody is walking into the theater hoping for a carefully crafted drama about street racing. No one is expecting a grounded story that obeys the laws of physics or treats gravity like a serious limitation. That version of the franchise existed once years ago, but the series we're watching now operates under a completely different set of rules. Today, a Fast and Furious movie promises something else entirely. It promises spectacle. The kind of spectacle where engines roar, buildings collapse, and cars perform stunts that feel less like driving and more like controlled chaos. The kind of spectacle where logic quietly steps aside so adrenaline can take the wheel, and the filmmakers know it. There's no attempt anymore to convince us that what we're seeing could happen in the real world. The franchise has fully embraced its identity as an outrageous blockbuster experience, one designed for audiences who want to sit back, grab a bucket of popcorn, and watch the impossible unfold at full speed. Because the truth is, the appeal of these movies has shifted over time. The early films were built around underground racing culture. Tight streets, modified engines, rival drivers pushing their machines to the edge. It was a world that felt gritty and personal. But the modern Fast Saga has moved far beyond that. Now the scale is enormous. The missions are global. The stakes involve technology capable of changing the balance of power across entire nations. And the action scenes? They become the main event. Bigger, louder, and more elaborate with every new installment. Cars no longer just race. They leap across impossible gaps. They crash through massive obstacles. They swing across terrain that seems completely hostile to the idea of driving. And yet, somehow, it works. Because the audience isn't looking for realism anymore. They're looking for the thrill of escalation, the excitement of seeing how far the franchise is willing to push its own boundaries this time. Every new film raises the same unspoken challenge. What's the craziest thing these characters can do next? That expectation has become part of the viewing experience. When a scene starts building momentum, viewers aren't asking whether the stunt makes sense. They're asking how outrageous it's about to become. Will the car survive? Will the characters walk away from another impossible situation? Will the film push the limits of action filmmaking even further? The answer is almost always yes. And that's exactly the point. At this stage in the franchise, realism isn't the selling point. The selling point is scale. It's the feeling that anything can happen, that every sequence might somehow top the last one. It's cinematic excess, delivered at full throttle. That's the deal the Fast and Furious series has made with its audience. And by the time we reach the 9th installment, everyone involved seems perfectly aware of it. The filmmakers know what the fans want. The actors know what kind of world they're operating in. And the audience knows that when those engines start revving, the laws of physics are about to take a very long vacation. Because watching a Fast and Furious movie today isn't really about believing what you see on screen, it's about enjoying the ride. To understand what Fast and Furious has become today, you almost have to rewind all the way back to where it started, because the franchise that began in 2001 looks almost nothing like the cinematic monster it has grown into. The original, The Fast and the Furious, was surprisingly grounded. It lived in a very specific world: nighttime street races, underground car culture, small crews of drivers pushing their machines through narrow city streets. The stakes were personal, the conflicts were local, and the story itself revolved around loyalty, crime, and identity. At its core, it was about a cop infiltrating a group of street racers, fast cars, tight races, a few daring heists. That was the entire playground. But somewhere along the road, the series started changing. The turning point came with Fast 5, when the franchise quietly shifted gears. Instead of focusing purely on racing culture, the films began embracing something much bigger: international missions, large-scale heists, and action sequences that felt closer to blockbuster spy thrillers than underground racing dramas. From that moment on, the scale kept expanding. The crew wasn't just racing anymore. They were traveling across continents. They were dealing with intelligence agencies, secret operations, and threats that extended far beyond the streets where the story originally began. And with every new installment, the world of the franchise grew larger. Cars were no longer just vehicles for competition. They became tools of spectacle. Massive chases erupted across cities. Military hardware entered the picture. Villains commanded armies, technology, and resources powerful enough to threaten global security. By the time we reach F9, the Fast Saga, the transformation is complete. The series now operates less like a crime story and more like a mythic action saga. The characters themselves have taken on an almost legendary quality. Dom Toretto is no longer just a skilled driver. He's become a kind of unstoppable figure within this universe, a man whose loyalty, strength, and determination seem to bend the rules of reality itself. His crew has evolved in the same way. Over time, they've transformed from street racers into something closer to a global team of heroes, people who somehow find themselves facing threats capable of reshaping the world. And strangely enough, the films never stop to question how that transition happened. Instead, they lean into it. The rules of this universe slowly changed. Realism became less important than emotional stakes. Logic began taking a backseat to spectacle. The series started building its own mythology, one where loyalty, legacy, and family carry more weight than the laws of physics. Characters survive impossible situations. Long-lost allies return. The past is constantly being rewritten and expanded. It's storytelling that feels less like traditional action filmmaking and more like modern mythology. And that's exactly what the franchise has become. Because when you look at the Fast and Furious saga today, you're not just watching a collection of action movies anymore. You're watching a cinematic universe built over decades, one that has grown, shifted, and reinvented itself again and again, while somehow keeping its core identity intact. What started as a modest street racing drama has evolved into one of Hollywood's most ambitious action franchises, a saga that no longer lives on the streets, but on a stage big enough to hold the entire world. If there's one idea that has defined the Fast and Furious franchise from the very beginning, it's not speed, explosions, or even the cars themselves. It's family. And over the years, that word has slowly transformed from a simple theme into something much bigger, almost a rule that governs the entire universe of these films. From the earliest days of The Fast and the Furious, Dom Toretto made one thing clear. The people around his table weren't just friends or partners, they were family. A group bound not by blood, but by loyalty, trust, and the shared risks of the life they had chosen. That idea became the emotional backbone of the entire saga. Because while the action kept growing larger with every sequel, the core of the story never really changed. Beneath all the high-speed chases and impossible stunts, the films always returned to the same belief. The bond between these characters is stronger than anything trying to break them apart. And over time, the definition of that family kept expanding. The crew, new allies joined. Former enemies became trusted partners. People who once stood on opposite sides of the story eventually found themselves sitting at the same table. In the world of Fast and Furious, loyalty can rewrite history. But the concept of family doesn't stop with the chosen crew. With F9, the Fast Saga, the series pushes the idea even further by introducing a new layer of conflict, Dom's own blood family. For the first time, the story dives directly into Dom's past, revealing a long-lost brother whose presence forces old wounds back to the surface. Suddenly, the theme of family isn't just about the people Dom chose to protect. It's about the people he grew up with, and the complicated history that shaped him long before the world-saving missions began. That shift adds a different kind of tension to the story, because chosen family is simple. Loyalty is clear. Everyone around Dom understands the rules. Blood family, on the other hand, carries history, resentment, regret, memories that refuse to fade, and that's where the emotional weight of the film begins to take shape. At the same time, the saga continues to acknowledge another figure who remains deeply connected to the crew even in absence. Brian O'Connor, portrayed for years by Paul Walker, may no longer appear physically in the story, but his presence still lingers in the world of the franchise. He's referenced, remembered, treated as if he's simply living his life somewhere beyond the camera's frame, and that choice reinforces the central philosophy of the series. In this universe, family members never truly disappear. They might step away, they might change paths. But once someone becomes part of the family, they remain connected to it forever. That idea may not make much sense in terms of realism, but emotionally, it's the glue that holds the entire saga together. Because when you strip away the explosions, the globe-trotting missions, and the impossible stunts, the Fast and Furious films always circle back to the same place. A group of people gathered around a table, laughing, eating, remembering the battles they've survived, and proving, once again, that no matter how big the world becomes, everything still comes back to family. For a franchise that has always been built around the idea of family, it was probably inevitable that one day the story would introduce a conflict that cuts deeper than any outside enemy. And that's exactly what happens in F9, the Fast Saga. Because this time, the threat facing Dom Toretto doesn't just come from another criminal mastermind or global terrorist. It comes from someone far more complicated, someone tied directly to his past. For the first time in the saga, the film reveals that Dom has a brother, Jakob Toretto. Played by Cena, Jakob enters the story not as a long-lost ally returning to reconnect with family, but as a dangerous adversary standing on the opposite side of the battlefield. From the moment he appears, it's clear that this isn't just another rivalry between hero and villain. This is personal. The tension between the two brothers stretches back years, rooted in events that happened long before the globe-trotting missions and high-tech conspiracies that now define the series. Their relationship was fractured by tragedy, hardened by resentment, and left unresolved for decades. And that unresolved history hangs over every interaction between them. The film slowly begins pulling back the curtain on what happened in the past, revealing that the defining moment for both brothers was the death of their father. What once looked like a tragic racing accident eventually becomes the source of suspicion, blame, and anger that push the two brothers in completely different directions. For Dom, That moment shaped everything. It fueled the rage that led him to prison, it hardened his personality, and it built the emotional walls that fans have watched him carry throughout the entire franchise. Jakob, however, walked a very different path. Instead of remaining within the world Dom created with his crew, Jakob disappeared into the shadows, eventually building connections in a world of covert operations, private armies, and global power struggles. By the time he re-enters the story, he's no longer just Dom's brother. He's a highly trained operative with the resources to challenge the entire team. What makes this conflict interesting isn't just the action that comes from it, it's the emotional tension underneath. Because unlike the many enemies the crew has faced over the years, Jakob isn't someone Dom can simply defeat and move on from. Their fight carries history. Every chase, every confrontation, every clash between them feels loaded with years of unresolved anger. When they face each other, it's not just two powerful figures battling for control of a dangerous technology. It's two brothers confronting the past they never truly escaped. And in a franchise where loyalty and family bonds have always been the ultimate guiding force, that kind of conflict creates a very different kind of drama. Because defeating an enemy is one thing, facing your own family is something else entirely. By the time the franchise reaches F9, the Fast Saga, something interesting happens. The series stops pretending that what we're watching makes any kind of realistic sense, and honestly, that might be the smartest decision it could have made. Because after nearly 2 decades of escalating action, gravity-defying stunts, and characters walking away from situations that would normally end any mission instantly, the Fast and Furious universe has reached a point where realism simply isn't the goal anymore. Instead, the film leans directly into the chaos. Throughout the story, the characters themselves start asking the same question that audiences have probably been wondering for years: how are they still alive after everything they've survived? It's a moment that almost feels like the movie pausing to acknowledge its own reputation. Car chases that should end in disaster somehow turn into miraculous escapes. Explosions erupt around the team, yet everyone walks away with barely a scratch. Vehicles perform stunts that seem to operate on a completely different version of physics. And rather than trying to justify any of it, the film occasionally turns that impossibility into the joke. At one point, the characters even discuss the idea that maybe the laws of physics simply don't apply to them anymore. It's a quick line, but it reveals something important about the tone of the movie. The filmmakers understand exactly what kind of world they're operating in. They know the audience sees the absurdity, and instead of fighting that perception, they embrace it. That self-awareness changes the way the spectacle works. Instead of asking viewers to believe that everything on screen is plausible, the movie invites them to enjoy the ridiculousness of it all. The stunts become less about realism and more about pushing the limits of imagination. How far can the series go? How outrageous can the next sequence become? By acknowledging its own over-the-top nature, the film almost turns the entire experience into a shared joke between the movie and the audience. Everyone watching understands that the situations are impossible, but that's exactly what makes them entertaining. It's a kind of cinematic wink, a signal that the franchise has fully accepted what it has become, a universe where survival is practically guaranteed, physics is optional, and every new adventure tries to outdo the last. In many ways, that awareness is part of why the series still works after so many installments. The movies don't try to convince you that they're realistic action stories anymore. They simply promise one thing: bigger chaos, bigger stunts, and the kind of wild spectacle that makes you laugh, shake your head, and ask the same question the characters are asking themselves: did that really just happen? If there's one thing the Fast and Furious franchise has mastered over the years, it's the art of escalation. Every new film arrives with an unspoken challenge. Whatever happened in the last movie, this one has to go bigger. By the time we reach F9, the Fast Saga, that philosophy is pushed to its absolute limit. The movie doesn't just deliver action sequences, it builds entire set pieces designed to overwhelm the screen with movement, destruction, and pure kinetic chaos. And from the very first major chase, the film makes its intentions clear. Cars aren't simply racing anymore. They're flying through jungles, tearing across unstable terrain, and swinging across massive gaps that look like they belong in a stunt show rather than a road. Vehicles smash through barriers, skid along cliffs, and somehow land exactly where they need to in order to keep the momentum going. the spectacle never slows down. One moment sends drivers racing through a deadly minefield where hesitation means disaster. Speed becomes the only way to survive, forcing the characters to push their machines harder than ever. Explosions erupt around them as the road itself becomes part of the danger. Then the action shifts again. Another sequence places the crew on a fragile wooden bridge that begins collapsing beneath them as they race across it. The structure creaks, splinters, and breaks apart piece by piece while cars struggle to reach the other side before gravity finally wins. But perhaps the most chaotic set piece arrives when the film introduces a massive electromagnetic weapon. Suddenly, entire city streets transform into unpredictable battlegrounds. Cars slam sideways across pavement as invisible forces drag metal objects through the air. Vehicles crash into buildings. Obstacles snap violently toward the magnet, and the battlefield becomes a constantly shifting maze of destruction. It's the kind of idea that only this franchise would attempt, and somehow it keeps going. Fights erupt between speeding vehicles. Characters leap from car to car while engines roar beneath them. Massive armored trucks plow through crowded environments as the crew attempts to regain control of situations that spiral further out of reach with every passing second. Then the film crosses a line that almost feels like the ultimate symbol of escalation. The action leaves Earth. Roman and Teji's experimental rocket car, an idea that initially sounds like a joke, actually launches into orbit. What begins as a ridiculous concept turns into one of the most memorable spectacles the franchise has ever attempted. Cars in space. It's the kind of moment that perfectly captures the identity the series has built over time. Every sequel has pushed the boundaries a little further, gradually transforming the action from street-level thrills into something that feels almost mythic in scale. At this point, the question isn't whether the next set piece will be realistic. The question is simply how outrageous it's going to be. And F9 answers that question the only way the Fast and Furious franchise knows how: by hitting the accelerator and refusing to slow down. One of the reasons the Fast and Furious franchise has managed to survive for more than 2 decades isn't just the action, it's the people. Over the years, the series has built something that feels less like a typical cast and more like a massive ensemble, an evolving group of characters whose relationships have slowly become the heart of the entire saga. At the center of that group, of course, is Vin Diesel, returning once again as Dom Toretto. Dom has always been the anchor of the story. While the world around him becomes increasingly chaotic, cars flying through impossible environments, global conspiracies unfolding across continents, his character remains steady, serious, and almost mythically calm. That presence gives the franchise its emotional center. But Dom isn't alone. Around him is a crew that fans have watched grow and change over multiple films. Michelle Rodriguez returns as Letty, bringing both strength and emotional balance to Dom's world. Her character has gone through one of the most complicated arcs in the series, yet she remains one of the most grounded figures within the crew. Then there's the comedic energy that often lightens the tone of these increasingly intense missions. Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce and Ludacris as Tej Parker continue their long-running partnership. Their constant banter, arguments, and sarcastic commentary provide a layer of humor that cuts through the explosive chaos surrounding them. In many ways, their dynamic acts as the audience's voice, reacting to the insanity of the situations they find themselves in. Adding another layer to the team is Natalie Emmanuel as Ramsey, whose technical expertise often becomes the key to solving the impossible problems the crew encounters. She represents the newer generation of characters introduced as the franchise expanded into more technologically driven missions. And of course, the story continues to reconnect with characters who have been part of the saga's long history. Jordana Brewster returns as Mia Toretto, reminding audiences that Dom's world has always been rooted in family relationships that stretch far beyond the action itself. Meanwhile, the villain side of the story gains strength from Charlize Theron, who once again steps into the role of Cypher. Her cold, calculating presence provides a sharp contrast to the loyalty-driven world Dom's crew operates in. And then there's the franchise's newest powerhouse addition. John Cena enters the saga as Jakob Toretto, Dom's estranged brother. His physical presence fits naturally into the high-impact world of the series, bringing a new level of intensity to the action, while also introducing a deeply personal conflict that reshapes the emotional landscape of the film. What makes this ensemble work isn't just the star power, it's the chemistry. These characters feel like they've lived through years of adventures together. Their conversations carry history. Their jokes feel natural. Even the arguments between them reflect a familiarity that can only come from long-standing relationships. And that dynamic becomes essential as the action continues to grow more extreme. Because while the stunts may get bigger and the missions more dangerous, the audience keeps returning for the same reason they always have, to spend time with this group of characters. A team that, over the years, has become something much more than just a cast. They've become a family. By the time you reach the 9th installment of the saga, something fascinating happens to the Fast and Furious experience. The spectacle becomes both the film's greatest strength and its most obvious weakness. Because on one hand, F9, the Fast Saga delivers exactly what fans have come to expect from this franchise: massive action, relentless energy, and set pieces that seem determined to outdo everything that came before. Cars crash through buildings, explosions ripple through entire environments. Vehicles perform stunts that look less like driving and more like controlled chaos unfolding at full speed. From a pure entertainment perspective, it's undeniably impressive. The scale is enormous. The action rarely slows down. Every major sequence is designed to feel bigger, louder, and more outrageous than the last. When the engines start roaring and the chase begins, the film commits fully to delivering that roller coaster sensation audiences have grown accustomed to. But here's the interesting part. The very thing that makes the movie entertaining is also what pushes it dangerously close to absurdity. Because at a certain point, the escalation becomes almost unbelievable. The stunts stretch so far beyond realism that the audience can't help but react with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. You watch a scene unfold and think, that can't possibly work. And then somehow, it does. Characters survive situations that seem impossible. Cars perform maneuvers that feel like they belong in science fiction. The laws of physics appear to take frequent breaks whenever the story needs them to. For some viewers, that's part of the fun. The laughter, the shock. The moment when everyone in the theater collectively wonders whether the film just crossed another line of cinematic insanity. But for others, that same spectacle can start to feel overwhelming. Because when the action becomes too exaggerated, it risks pulling the audience out of the story entirely. Instead of feeling tension, viewers might simply shake their heads at the sheer ridiculousness of what they're seeing. And that's the balancing act the franchise constantly walks. Every sequel tries to raise the stakes. Every new set piece tries to be more ambitious than the last, but the higher the series climbs, the thinner that line becomes between thrilling entertainment and complete absurdity. Yet somehow, the Fast and Furious saga has managed to turn that tension into part of its identity. The disbelief isn't necessarily a problem, it's part of the experience. When audiences react with laughter, surprise, or even a little bit of confusion, the film is still achieving something powerful. It's creating a moment that people remember. Because whether viewers are cheering for the action or shaking their heads at the insanity, one thing is certain. The spectacle leaves an impression. And in a franchise built on pushing boundaries, sometimes that's exactly the point. To understand the emotional weight behind the conflict in F9, the Fast Saga, the story takes an unexpected step backward in time. Long before the globe-spanning missions, long before the crew became involved in international conspiracies and high-tech threats, the Toretto family lived a very different life. Their world revolved around racing tracks, engines, and the quiet pride that came from building something with their own hands. At the center of that world was Jack Toretto. Jack wasn't just a father figure. He was a respected stock car racer, a man whose life was defined by the roar of engines and the discipline of competition. His sons, Dominic and Jakob, grew up watching him prepare for races, learning the craft of mechanics and teamwork as they worked alongside him in the pit crew. For a brief moment, the film shows us a version of the Toretto family that feels grounded and ordinary. A father teaching his sons the world he understands best. A family bound together by speed, hard work, and pride. But that sense of stability doesn't last. During one race in 1989, tensions flare between Jack and another driver on the track. The competition intensifies, emotions rise, and what should have been just another race suddenly spirals into disaster. Jack's car loses control. In a violent instant, the vehicle slams into the wall, flipping across the track before erupting into flames. The crash is brutal, sudden, and final. By the time the wreckage settles, Jack Toretto is gone. For Dominic, the moment becomes the defining trauma of his life. Overwhelmed by grief and rage, he lashes out at the driver he believes caused the accident. What begins as a confrontation quickly turns into a brutal attack, one that nearly ends in tragedy of its own. The aftermath of that moment sends Dom to prison, marking the beginning of the hardened, guarded version of the character audiences would later meet. But the tragedy doesn't just shape Dom. It fractures the entire Toretto family. The accident leaves behind unanswered questions, lingering suspicion, and a growing distance between Dom and Jakob. What exactly happened during that race? Was it truly just a tragic accident, or something more complicated? Those doubts slowly evolve into resentment that quietly grows over the years until it finally explodes when the brothers cross paths again as adults. And that's what gives this moment its importance. The crash in 1989 isn't just a backstory detail. It's the emotional fault line running beneath the entire conflict of the film. Everything that happens later, the rivalry, the betrayal, the anger between the brothers, can be traced back to that single moment on the racetrack. In a franchise built around speed and spectacle, it's striking that one of the most important turning points begins not with a world-ending threat, but with something far more personal. A family tragedy, a moment of loss, and a wound that never truly healed. After years of high-speed chases, global conspiracies, and battles that seem to push the limits of survival, F9, the Fast Saga begins with something surprisingly quiet. For the first time in a long while, Dom Toretto isn't racing toward danger. Instead, he's trying to stay away from it. We find Dom living far from the chaos that has defined most of his life. The roaring engines and explosive missions have been replaced by something much simpler: a quiet farm, open land, and a routine that feels almost peaceful. It's a world that looks nothing like the globe-trotting adventures the franchise has become known for, and at the center of that calm is his family. Dom shares this quiet life with Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez, and together they're raising his young son, Brian. The name itself carries emotional weight, serving as a reminder of the bond Dom shared with Brian O'Connor, portrayed by Paul Walker, a character who remains deeply connected to the franchise even though he no longer appears on screen. In these early moments, the film gives us something rare: Dom Toretto at rest. There are no high-speed pursuits, no enemies closing in from every direction. Just a father spending time with his child, trying perhaps for the first time to build a life that doesn't revolve around danger. But if you know the Fast and Furious saga, you already understand something important. Peace never lasts long. There's a quiet tension in these scenes, almost as if Dom himself senses that this calm is temporary. His entire life has been shaped by conflict, loyalty, and the constant pull of responsibility toward the people he considers family, and eventually, that responsibility returns. The arrival of Roman, Tej, and Ramsey brings news that immediately disrupts the fragile peace Dom has built. Intelligence operative Mr. Nobody has vanished after a mysterious attack on a transport plane, and the situation appears far more dangerous than it initially seems. Once again, the world is spiraling toward chaos. And once again, the crew believes there's only one person who can help stop it. For Dom, the decision isn't simple. Walking away from the quiet life he's built means stepping back into the dangerous world he tried to leave behind. It means putting himself, and possibly his family, back in the path of forces that rarely play by the rules. But the truth is, Dom Toretto has never been the kind of person who stays on the sidelines when people he cares about are in danger. So the peace ends. The engines start again. And the quiet life Dom briefly tasted fades into the distance as the next chapter of the saga begins. For much of the early Fast and Furious saga, the conflicts were relatively contained. Rival crews, dangerous heists, the occasional criminal mastermind. Serious problems certainly, but still grounded within a world that felt somewhat recognizable. But by the time we reach F9, the Fast Saga, the scale of the threat has expanded dramatically. And at the center of that escalation sits a piece of technology known as Project Aries. The story begins with a mysterious disaster. A transport plane carrying the imprisoned cyber-terrorist Cypher suddenly comes under attack while in flight. The aircraft crashes deep within remote wilderness, and the man responsible for the mission intelligence operative, Mr. Nobody, disappears without a trace. That alone would be enough to trigger alarm. But when Dom and the crew investigate the wreckage, they discover something far more troubling hidden among the debris: a fragment of the Aries system. and this isn't just another experimental gadget. Within the story, Aries is described as an incredibly powerful digital weapon, one capable of infiltrating and controlling any computer-based military system on Earth. Missiles, defense networks, surveillance systems, all of it could potentially fall under the command of whoever controls this technology. In other words, Aries isn't just dangerous. It's the kind of device that could rewrite the balance of power across the entire planet. If someone managed to fully activate it, especially if it were connected to a satellite network, it could theoretically take command of global weapon systems from orbit. The person holding that power wouldn't just control a city or a country. They could control the world's military infrastructure. And suddenly, the stakes of the story become enormous. What began as a mysterious crash site investigation quickly transforms into a race against time. Whoever gathers the pieces of Aries first will gain control of a weapon capable of reshaping the geopolitical landscape. For Dom and his crew, that realization changes everything. The mission is no longer just about rescuing Mr. Nobody or chasing down another villain. Now they're fighting to prevent a catastrophic shift in global power, one that could place unimaginable destructive capability into the wrong hands. That's the role Aries plays within the story. It functions as the engine driving the entire conflict forward. Every chase, every confrontation, every betrayal ultimately revolves around the same goal: controlling or destroying the system before someone else can use it. And in a franchise that once revolved around street races and stolen electronics, the presence of a world-controlling digital weapon perfectly illustrates how far the series has evolved. The roads have grown larger, the enemies more powerful, and the stakes now extend to the entire world. The crew. But in F9, The Fast Saga, the story takes a different approach. Because this time, the enemy isn't just another villain with dangerous technology or a private army. This time, the enemy is family. Jakob, played by Cena, enters the saga as one of the most personal antagonists the franchise has ever introduced. Unlike many of the previous threats the crew has faced, Jakob isn't an outsider stepping into Dom's world. He's someone who grew up inside it. The film presents Jakob as a highly skilled operative, someone who has spent years building connections within covert operations and military-style networks. By the time he appears in the present timeline, he's no longer just Dom's estranged brother. He's the leader of a powerful private force capable of launching large-scale attacks and executing complex global operations. From his very first appearance, Jakob makes it clear that he's not someone to underestimate. When Dom and the team arrive at the wreckage of the downed aircraft searching for answers, they're suddenly ambushed by a heavily armed private army. Vehicles roar through the jungle, gunfire erupts, and the entire investigation turns into a high-speed battlefield. At the center of that attack stands Jakob. He isn't just observing the chaos, he's orchestrating it. His mission is clear: seize control of the Aries device, a piece of technology capable of taking command of global weapons systems. And he's willing to tear through anyone standing in his way to obtain it. What makes Jakob particularly dangerous is that he knows Dom. He understands how his brother thinks. He knows the crew's strengths, their loyalty, their patterns. That knowledge gives him a strategic advantage that few enemies in the franchise have ever possessed. But beneath the tactical brilliance and military power lies something deeper: resentment. Years of unresolved anger stemming from the tragedy that shattered the Toretto family. The death of their father created a divide between the brothers, one that quietly grew over time until it turned into full-blown hostility. For Jakob, the mission isn't just about power or technology. It's about proving something. Proving that he's stronger, smarter, more capable than the brother who once overshadowed him. The rivalry becomes more than just a battle for control of the Aries system. It becomes a confrontation between two men shaped by the same past but driven down very different paths. And that's what makes Jakob such a compelling antagonist. Because every time he faces Dom, the fight carries emotional weight. It's not simply hero versus villain, it's brother versus brother. Two sides of the same family history, colliding in a conflict that's been building for decades. One thing the Fast and Furious franchise has learned over the years is that the opening action sequence sets the tone for everything that follows. If the first major chase doesn't make the audience lean forward in their seats, the rest of the film has a much harder job ahead of it. And F9, The Fast Saga wastes absolutely no time making its intentions clear. Not long after the story begins unfolding, the crew finds themselves investigating the wreckage of a mysterious plane crash deep within dense wilderness. The environment itself already feels dangerous: steep cliffs, unstable terrain, and narrow jungle paths that look barely wide enough for a single vehicle. But the moment the team discovers a fragment of the powerful Aries device, the quiet investigation instantly turns into chaos. A private army suddenly descends on the crash site. Gunfire erupts, vehicles roar to life, and within seconds the entire location transforms into a high-speed battlefield. What started as a search mission becomes a desperate chase through thick jungle terrain where every turn carries the risk of disaster. Cars tear through trees, skid along muddy paths, and race dangerously close to cliffs that drop into open wilderness. The drivers are forced to navigate terrain that barely qualifies as a road, while enemies close in from every direction. And then the sequence escalates even further. At the center of the pursuit is Jakob, who manages to seize the Aries component during the chaos. As Dom and the crew attempt to intercept him, the chase pushes toward one of the franchise's most outrageous escape moments. A helicopter swoops overhead. Suspended beneath it is an enormous magnetic system powerful enough to lift entire vehicles. In one sudden move, Jakob's car is literally pulled off the ground and carried into the air as the helicopter extracts him from the battlefield. It's the kind of moment that perfectly captures the current identity of the franchise. The action isn't just big, it's designed to be spectacular in ways that feel almost impossible. The laws of physics bend, technology operates on a larger-than-life scale, and every sequence tries to deliver something the audience hasn't quite seen before. But more importantly, this early chase accomplishes something narratively important. It establishes the stakes. The Aries device has already fallen into dangerous hands. Jakob has proven he's a serious threat, and the crew now understands that stopping him will require far more than a simple pursuit. From that moment forward, the film shifts fully into high gear. The opening escalation has already set the tone. The missions are bigger, the enemies are stronger, and the action will only grow more outrageous as the story races forward. For much of the Fast and Furious saga, the emotional center of Dom Toretto's world has always extended beyond the action. Beneath the roaring engines and explosive missions, there has always been a family holding everything together. And one of the most important members of that family is Mia Toretto. In F9, The Fast Saga, the story brings Mia back into the spotlight in a way that feels both natural and meaningful. Played once again by Jordana Brewster, Mia's return isn't just another familiar face stepping back into the crew. It represents a deeper connection to the history that's now driving the entire conflict. Because this time, the threat facing the team isn't just global, it's personal. With Jakob Toretto emerging as the central antagonist, the story suddenly becomes a family matter in the most literal sense. For Dom, the confrontation with his long-lost brother carries decades of resentment and unresolved pain, but Mia refuses to stand on the sidelines while that history unfolds. Despite Dom's hesitation, she insists on joining the mission. That decision changes the dynamic of the story in an important way. Mia isn't just supporting Dom emotionally from a distance, she becomes actively involved in confronting the past that shaped both of them. Her presence reminds the audience that the Toretto family isn't defined by a single person. It's a shared legacy. Throughout the film, Mia helps bridge the gap between the past and the present. She understands the history between Dom and Jakob in a way that many of the other characters simply can't. That perspective gives her a unique role within the team. Someone capable of seeing beyond the anger and recognizing the deeper wounds that still exist between the brothers. And her involvement becomes especially important as the story begins unraveling the truth about what really happened years ago. At the same time, Mia's return reconnects the film with the emotional roots of the franchise. In a saga that has grown increasingly larger and more spectacular, her character brings the narrative back to the core idea that has always driven these films: family ties that refuse to break, even under the most extreme circumstances. But Mia's role isn't limited to emotional support. She's right there in the action as well, tracking down leads, traveling across continents, and helping uncover the mysteries surrounding Han's survival and the secrets connected to the Aries technology. Her journey eventually leads all the way to Tokyo, where the film reveals one of its biggest surprises, and in that moment, Mia becomes part of a story thread that reconnects multiple eras of the franchise at once. It's a reminder that while Dom may be the face of the saga, the Toretto story has always been larger than one person. It's about the family that stands beside him. One of the most surprising twists in F9, the Fast Saga, revolves around a character many fans believed had been gone for years, Han Lu. For longtime followers of the franchise, Han's apparent death had been one of the most emotional turning points in the saga. His fate was tied to the events of the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, where a fiery crash seemed to bring his story to a tragic end. But in the Fast and Furious universe, the past rarely stays buried forever. As the investigation into the Aries technology unfolds, clues begin pointing towards something almost impossible. Evidence suggests that Han, long believed to be dead, may somehow still be alive. The possibility alone is enough to send the crew searching for answers. That search eventually leads to Tokyo. There, the film reconnects with characters who were central to the earlier era of the franchise. Familiar faces from the Tokyo Drift storyline reappear, creating a bridge between different chapters of the saga's history. And then, the truth finally comes into focus. Han didn't die in that explosion. Instead, his death was carefully staged as part of a secret operation connected to intelligence agent Mr. Nobody. When powerful enemies began pursuing the Aries technology, Han was given a mission that required him to disappear completely. The plan was simple: fake his death, vanish from the world, and protect someone whose life was tied directly to the dangerous system everyone is now chasing. That person is Elle. Han had been secretly raising and protecting the young girl, whose connection to the Aries project makes her an essential piece of the puzzle. Keeping her hidden meant keeping himself hidden as well, even if it meant letting the world believe he had died. But secrecy in the Fast universe rarely lasts forever. Eventually, the enemies searching for the Aries device catch up to him. The carefully constructed illusion begins to unravel, pulling Han back into the conflict he had tried to stay away from. And just like that, one of the franchise's most beloved characters returns to the story. His survival does more than simply shock the audience. It reconnects several different eras of the saga. Characters from older films suddenly become part of the present narrative again, reminding viewers just how wide the Fast and Furious universe has become over the years. For fans, Han's return carries a sense of closure. A character who once seemed lost to the past is suddenly back where he belongs, among the crew that always treated him as family. While F9, the Fast Saga, is packed with world-threatening technology, family drama, and massive action sequences, the film also understands something very important. Not every moment can be serious, because when a franchise reaches the level of spectacle that Fast and Furious operates on, a little humor becomes essential to keep the ride entertaining, and that's where Roman Pierce and Tej Parker step in. Played by Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris, the duo have long served as the comedic heartbeat of the team. While Dom leads with quiet intensity and the missions themselves grow increasingly dangerous, Roman and Tej bring a different kind of energy, one built on banter, skepticism, and a constant awareness of just how insane their situations tend to become. In F9, that dynamic takes center stage during one of the film's most unusual side missions. Their journey reconnects the story with characters from the Tokyo era of the franchise, including Sean Boswell and his inventive group of mechanics. What the team discovers is something that sounds completely ridiculous at first glance: a homemade experimental vehicle designed to function as a rocket-powered car. Yes, a car, powered by rockets. It's exactly the kind of idea that perfectly captures the strange evolution of the Fast and Furious universe. What began as a series about underground street racing has now reached a point where experimental space travel is somehow part of the conversation. And Roman, in particular, reacts exactly the way the audience might. He questions everything. Throughout the mission, Roman repeatedly voices his disbelief at the increasingly absurd situations the team survives. At one point, he even begins wondering whether they might somehow be invincible, pointing out that after years of surviving explosions, crashes, and impossible stunts, none of them seem to suffer lasting consequences. Tej, on the other hand, tries to maintain a more practical mindset. As the technical mind of the duo, he focuses on figuring out how the rocket vehicle might actually work, even if the plan itself sounds completely insane. The result is a perfect balance of humor and spectacle. Their conversations lighten the tone just as the story threatens to spiral into total chaos. Instead of pretending everything is logical, Roman and Tej openly question the madness unfolding around them, almost acting as a voice for the audience watching the film. But the comedy doesn't stop the mission from becoming important. In fact, what begins as the most absurd assignment in the movie eventually turns into one of the key operations needed to stop the global threat. The rocket car, initially treated like a wild experiment, becomes the tool that allows them to reach orbit and destroy the satellite connected to the Aries system. And somehow, against all expectations, they actually pull it off. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. And it's exactly the kind of moment that defines the modern Fast and Furious saga, where humor, action, and impossible ideas collide at full speed. As the events of F9, the Fast saga continue to unfold, the conflict between Dom and Jakob becomes more than just another battle between hero and villain. Because for Dom, this mission isn't simply about stopping a dangerous plan. It's about understanding how his own brother became the man now standing on the opposite side of the fight. To find those answers, Dom begins retracing the steps of Jakob's life after the tragedy that shattered the Toretto family. For years, Jakob vanished from Dom's world completely. After their father's death and the events that followed, the two brothers went their separate ways, each carrying the weight of that moment in very different directions. But while Dom stayed close to the life he knew, Jakob disappeared. And the trail Dom follows reveals just how far his brother traveled during those missing years. One of the first clues leads Dom to an old connection from the past. Buddy, the former mechanic who once worked alongside their father. Buddy remembers the days when the Toretto family lived around racetracks and garage floors, before everything changed. From him, Dom learns that Jakob didn't simply drift away after the accident, he left with purpose. Over time, Jakob built a new life far beyond the world of street racing. His skills behind the wheel and his mechanical instincts eventually pulled him into a far more dangerous environment. One tied to covert operations, powerful organizations, and the kind of missions that operate in the shadows. The brother Dom once knew had transformed into something else entirely. A highly trained operative with global connections. That discovery pushes Dom's search even further across the map. Following the trail leads him to London, where he encounters a familiar figure in the sprawling world of the franchise, Magdalene Shaw, better known as Queenie. Played by Helen Mirren, Queenie offers Dom another crucial piece of the puzzle. Through her, Dom begins to understand that Jakob's path into the world of covert power wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate evolution. The boy who once stood beside him in their father's pit crew had grown into someone capable of commanding resources, soldiers, and technology on a global scale. The brother Dom remembered was gone, replaced by a man operating within a world of espionage and high-stakes power struggles. But even as Dom uncovers these details, the investigation doesn't bring him peace. If anything, it deepens the mystery. Because every new answer raises another question. What exactly drove Jakob down this path? Was it ambition, revenge, or something rooted even deeper in the past the two brothers still haven't fully confronted? And that uncertainty adds another layer of tension to the story. Because Dom isn't just chasing an enemy across continents. He's chasing the truth about the brother he thought he understood. Even when she's locked behind reinforced glass, Cypher remains one of the most dangerous minds in the Fast and Furious universe. In F9, the Fast Saga, the cyber-terrorist played by Charlize Theron spends much of the film physically confined inside a high-security containment cell. But what makes Cypher such a compelling villain isn't brute force or overwhelming armies, it's control. Unlike many antagonists who rely on physical dominance, Cypher operates through manipulation, strategy, and psychological pressure. Even while imprisoned, she continues to influence the events unfolding outside those walls, proving that confinement doesn't necessarily mean defeat. From the moment the Aries technology becomes part of the story, Cypher recognizes its true potential. The device represents exactly the kind of power she thrives on, an invisible weapon capable of controlling global systems without firing a single shot. And although she initially appears removed from the action, it becomes increasingly clear that she's watching everything carefully. Every move, every alliance, every opportunity. At first, Jakob seems determined to keep Cypher at a distance. His mission revolves around acquiring the Aries system, and he shows little interest in allowing someone as unpredictable as Cypher to interfere. But Cypher understands something that many others underestimate. Patience is a weapon. She waits for the right moment, knowing that situations built on fragile alliances rarely remain stable for long. And eventually, the cracks begin to appear. Jakob's partnership with Otto, an arrogant and reckless figure funding the operation, creates exactly the kind of unstable dynamic Cypher knows how to exploit. Otto possesses enormous resources and power, but he lacks discipline. His ambition pushes him to escalate the situation faster than anyone can safely control. And that's where Cypher begins to maneuver. Once Otto realizes that Cypher's knowledge and strategic mind could help secure the final pieces of the Aries system, he pulls her out of confinement and places her back into the center of the operation. Suddenly, the woman who was once locked away becomes a key player again. From that moment forward, the power balance shifts. Cypher doesn't need to dominate the battlefield directly. Instead, she thrives in the chaos between competing ambitions. While others focus on brute strength and technological dominance, she quietly studies weaknesses and manipulates the direction of events. Her presence adds another layer of tension to the story. Because unlike many villains in the franchise who rely on physical confrontation, Cypher represents a different kind of threat, one built on intelligence, patience, and the ability to turn other people's plans against them. Even when she isn't driving the cars or leading the chase, her influence hangs over the mission, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous player in the game isn't the one making the loudest move, but the one quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. If there's a moment in F9, the Fast Saga, that perfectly captures the franchise's love for outrageous action concepts, it's the sequence set in the streets of Edinburgh. Because this isn't just another car chase, it's a chase built around a weapon that literally bends the environment itself. As the pursuit for the Aries technology intensifies, Jakob's operation deploys a massive electromagnetic device capable of manipulating metal objects from a distance. Suddenly, the streets of the city stop behaving like normal roads and start acting like unpredictable battlegrounds controlled by invisible forces. Cars are no longer simply racing forward. They're being dragged sideways, pulled into buildings, snapped across intersections as if an enormous magnet is tearing the city apart. It's chaos in motion. The moment the device activates, the chase becomes something entirely different from the traditional Fast and Furious pursuit. Instead of drivers simply trying to outrun each other, the characters now have to navigate a constantly shifting environment where vehicles and obstacles move without warning. A car speeding down the road might suddenly veer violently off course. A parked vehicle can be ripped across the street like a projectile. Metal barriers, street fixtures, and anything else caught in the magnet's pull become part of the destruction. The result is one of the most visually unpredictable action sequences in the film. At the center of this chaos is the crew attempting to counter Jakob's plan. Tej and Roman find themselves navigating the increasingly dangerous streets, while Ramsey works to take control of a truck equipped with the same magnet technology. If they can manipulate the device themselves, they might be able to turn the battlefield back in their favor. Meanwhile, Dom pushes forward through the wreckage, chasing Jakob through the magnetic storm that's tearing the city apart. Their pursuit eventually leads to a brutal confrontation between the brothers, a physical clash that carries years of tension behind every blow. But just when it seems like Jakob might finally be captured, the situation changes again. Alliances shift, new players enter the conflict, and the battle over the Aries system continues to spiral into even larger chaos. What makes the Edinburgh sequence memorable isn't just its scale, it's the creativity behind it. Instead of repeating the same kind of car chase audiences have seen before, the film introduces a new twist that transforms the entire environment into part of the action. Streets become weapons, vehicles become projectiles, and the rules of motion suddenly feel completely unpredictable. It's exactly the kind of spectacle the Fast and Furious franchise has become known for, a moment where imagination takes control of the road. At first glance, Jakob Toretto appears to be the primary threat in F9, the Fast Saga. He commands a private army, he's pursuing the dangerous Aries technology, and he stands directly opposite Dom in the story's central conflict. But as the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that Jakob isn't actually the mastermind behind the operation. Behind him stands someone even more dangerous in a different way, Otto. Played by Thu Ersted Rasmussen, Otto represents a very different kind of villain within the Fast and Furious universe. Unlike the hardened fighters and tactical operatives the crew has faced before, Otto isn't defined by discipline or loyalty. He's defined by power and the reckless desire to control it. Otto is a wealthy financier with access to vast resources. technology, weapons, mercenaries, and the kind of money that allows him to build a private army capable of launching global operations. While Jakob provides the skill and strategic experience needed to execute the mission, Otto provides the tools that make it possible. In many ways, their partnership is built on convenience. Jakob needs Otto's resources to pursue the Aries system. Otto needs Jakob's expertise to acquire it. Together, they form a dangerous alliance capable of threatening the entire world. But Otto's personality quickly reveals the weakness in that arrangement. He isn't interested in loyalty or long-term partnership. He's interested in domination. The moment he realizes that he can achieve his goals without Jakob, the alliance collapses instantly. During the climactic chase into Tbilisi, that betrayal becomes shockingly clear. As Jakob transports the final piece of the Aries system inside a massive armored truck, Otto suddenly decides he no longer needs him. Without hesitation, he turns on his own partner, literally throwing Jakob out of the moving vehicle and leaving him behind to face whatever consequences follow. It's a brutal moment, but it reveals exactly who Otto really is. Unlike the crew that Dom leads, where loyalty and family bonds define every decision, Otto operates in a world where relationships are purely transactional. Once someone stops being useful, they become expendable. That mindset makes him extremely dangerous. Because while Jakob's motivations are rooted in personal history and family conflict, Otto's motivations are far simpler. With the Aries system, he sees an opportunity to control the world's most powerful military networks, power on a global scale, and he's willing to betray anyone to get it. That betrayal ultimately reshapes the conflict of the film. Once Otto reveals his true intentions, Jakob is forced to confront the reality of what he helped create. The mission that once seemed like a path to proving himself suddenly becomes a catastrophe he helped unleash. And in that moment, the lines between enemies and allies begin to shift. Because sometimes the most dangerous villain isn't the one standing in front of you, it's the one quietly using everyone else to reach the top. As F9, the fast saga races toward its climax, the story converges in one final location, the city of Tbilisi. By this point, the stakes have reached their highest level. The Aries system, the powerful technology capable of taking control of global weapons networks, is only moments away from being activated. Otto's plan is already in motion, and the final phase depends on one critical step: uploading the Aries program to a satellite in orbit. Once that signal goes live, the world's defense systems could fall under a single command. Stopping that outcome requires something the crew has done many times before: splitting up and attacking the problem from multiple directions at once. But this time, the scale of the operation is unlike anything they've attempted before. On the ground, Dom leads the main pursuit. Alongside Letty, Mia, Ramsey, and Han, he races through the streets of Tbilisi chasing a massive armored truck carrying both Jakob and the completed Aries device. The vehicle barrels through the city like an unstoppable force, smashing obstacles aside as the crew tries to intercept it before the upload finishes. The chase quickly escalates into a chaotic battlefield. Cars weave through traffic at dangerous speeds. Gunfire erupts between vehicles. Explosions ripple through the streets as the armored truck plows forward with brutal momentum. Every second matters, because the satellite above the planet is already preparing to receive the upload signal, and that's where the second half of the plan comes into play. While Dom and the rest of the team fight to slow the operation on the ground, Roman and Tej take on an entirely different mission, one that pushes the limits of the franchise's imagination. Their goal is simple in theory, but outrageous in execution: reach the satellite. Destroy it before the upload completes. Using the experimental rocket-powered car developed earlier in the story, Roman and Tej launch themselves toward orbit in an improvised attempt to intercept the signal from space. It's a mission so improbable that even the characters themselves seem unsure whether it will actually work. Meanwhile, the ground chase intensifies. As Dom closes in on the armored truck, Otto reveals his true nature by betraying Jakob and throwing him from the moving vehicle. That moment changes everything. The brother Dom once saw only as an enemy suddenly becomes someone who can help stop the disaster he helped set in motion. With the situation spiraling out of control, the team pushes harder than ever. Above the Earth, Roman and Tej complete their mission in spectacular fashion, smashing their rocket vehicle directly into the satellite and destroying the Aries upload before it can fully activate. On the ground, the battle finally reaches its breaking point. The armored truck is stopped. the technology is neutralized, and the catastrophe Otto tried to unleash is finally brought to an end. It's a finale that perfectly captures the spirit of the modern Fast and Furious saga. Multiple missions unfolding at once, action exploding across different environments, and the entire team working together in ways that feel both chaotic and strangely coordinated. Because in this franchise, victory rarely comes from one hero alone. It comes from the entire family moving together at full speed. For most of F9, the Fast Saga, Jakob Toretto stands as one of the film's most dangerous figures. He's the man chasing the Aries technology, the leader of a powerful private force, and the brother whose return reopens wounds that never truly healed. But as the story approaches its climax, something begins to change. Because beneath the rivalry, beneath the years of resentment and distance, Jakob is still part of the same family Dom has spent his entire life protecting. And that connection eventually forces him to confront the consequences of his actions. The turning point arrives during the final mission in Tbilisi. As Jakob transports the Aries system inside a massive armored truck, his alliance with Otto suddenly collapses. Without warning, Otto decides he no longer needs him, and in a moment that perfectly reveals Otto's ruthless ambition, he throws Jakob out of the moving vehicle and leaves him behind. It's betrayal in its purest form. For Jakob, the moment is a harsh realization. The partnership he believed in was never built on loyalty. Otto was simply using him as a tool to acquire the Aries system. And suddenly, the conflict shifts. When Dom and Mia arrive at the scene, they don't finish the fight that had been building between the brothers. Instead, they save Jakob's life, pulling him out of a situation that could have easily ended in disaster. That moment forces Jakob to face something he's been running from for years: family. For most of the film, Jakob defined himself in opposition to Dom. Everything he did was driven by a need to prove himself, to step out from the shadow of the older brother he believed had wronged him. But when Otto's betrayal exposes the true cost of his choices, Jakob finally sees the path he's been following for what it really is, and he decides to change it. Instead of continuing the mission he helped start, Jakob turns against Otto and joins the effort to stop the catastrophe. It's not a dramatic speech or a sudden transformation. It's a quiet decision to help fix the damage he helped cause. By the time the conflict ends, the brothers find themselves standing in a very different place than where they began. The truth about the past has finally surfaced. The anger that defined their relationship for decades has begun to fade. And for the first time in years, Dom chooses not to hold on to the resentment that once divided them. Instead, he does something unexpected. He lets Jakob go. Handing him the keys to his car, Dom gives his brother the chance to disappear before authorities arrive. It's a small gesture on the surface, but symbolically it means everything. It's forgiveness. A recognition that family bonds can survive even the deepest fractures. Jakob's redemption doesn't erase the past, but it proves something that the Fast and Furious saga has been saying all along: no matter how far someone drifts away, there's always a road that leads back to family. At a certain point in the Fast and Furious saga, the question stopped being, how fast can these cars go, and became something much stranger: how far can they go? And in F9, the Fast Saga, the answer turns out to be much farther than anyone expected. Because this is the film where the franchise finally crosses a line that many long-running action series eventually approach. It leaves Earth. The idea begins almost like a joke. While Dom and the rest of the crew focus on the ground operation to stop the Aries system, Roman and Tiaj are handed a mission that sounds completely ridiculous at first: reach the satellite controlling the upload and destroy it. The only problem is that the satellite is orbiting the planet. That's where their solution comes in: a homemade experimental vehicle built by the Tokyo crew, a heavily modified car fitted with rocket boosters and barely functional protective gear. Yes, it's exactly as insane as it sounds. Roman, played by Tyrese Gibson, reacts the way most people would when asked to strap themselves into a rocket-powered car and launch toward space, with complete disbelief. Throughout the mission, he openly questions the plan, the physics behind it, and the chances of actually surviving the trip. TA, played by Ludacris, tries to maintain some sense of technical confidence, but even he seems aware that the situation has crossed into territory that no mechanic could realistically prepare for. But in the strange world of Fast and Furious, logic often takes a backseat to determination. So the plan moves forward. The rocket ignites. And suddenly Roman and Tej are rocketing upward through the atmosphere in what might be the most absurd vehicle ever introduced in the franchise. It's a moment that feels almost surreal. A series that began with illegal street races now has two characters floating in orbit, wearing improvised suits while piloting a machine that looks like it was assembled in a garage. Yet somehow, the sequence works, because the film leans fully into the ridiculousness of the situation. Instead of pretending the mission is perfectly logical, the characters react with the same mixture of panic, humor, and disbelief that the audience is probably feeling. And then comes the final step. With the satellite transmitting the signal that would activate the Aries system, Roman and Tej push their improvised spacecraft directly into it. The collision destroys the satellite and prevents the upload from completing, saving the world in the most unconventional way imaginable. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous, but it also perfectly captures how far the Fast and Furious franchise has evolved. What started as a story about underground racers has now reached a point where cars are literally flying through space, and somehow, against all odds, the crew survives once again. After the chaos settles in F9, the Fast Saga, after the chases, the explosions, and the world-ending technology has finally been stopped, the story slows down for a moment, and longtime fans of the franchise immediately recognize what that means. Because in the Fast and Furious universe, there's a tradition that always follows the storm: the family barbecue. Over the years, these scenes have become one of the most recognizable rituals in the entire saga. No matter how massive the mission was, no matter how dangerous the enemies were, the story almost always returns to the same place in the end: a simple table, food on the grill, and the crew gathered together once again. In many ways, these quiet moments say more about the franchise than any of the explosive action sequences. They remind the audience that beneath all the high-speed spectacle, the heart of these films has always been the people sitting around that table: Dom, Letty, Mia, Roman, Tej, Ramsey, Han. Characters who have spent years risking their lives together, now sharing something far more peaceful: a meal, laughter, and the relief of knowing they survived another impossible mission. The barbecue scene functions almost like the emotional punctuation mark of the entire story. It allows the film to step away from the chaos and return to the idea that has guided the saga from the beginning. Family isn't just a word in this world, it's a bond. A bond built through loyalty, sacrifice, and the shared experiences that connect these characters long after the engines stop roaring. But the moment also carries a deeper meaning, because as the crew gathers around the table, the scene quietly acknowledges someone who has always been part of this family, even when he isn't on screen: Brian O'Connor. Without directly showing him, the film hints at his presence in the most subtle way possible. A familiar car slowly approaches the house, pulling into the driveway just as the meal is about to begin. The camera never reveals the driver; it doesn't need to. The implication is enough. For fans who have followed the saga for years, the moment feels like a quiet tribute, a reminder that some members of the family are always part of the story, even when they remain just outside the frame. And that's what makes the barbecue scenes so powerful. They're not about the action. They're about what the action was protecting all along. Few characters in the Fast and Furious saga carry as much emotional weight as Brian O'Connor. For years, he stood alongside Dom Toretto as one of the central figures of the entire story. His journey from undercover cop to loyal member of the family became one of the defining arcs of the franchise, and the performance of Paul Walker helped turn Brian into one of the most beloved characters in the series. After Walker's passing, the films made a conscious decision. Instead of writing Brian out of existence, the story allowed him to step away from the dangerous life that Dom and the crew continued to live. The character remained alive within the universe of the saga, simply choosing a quieter path away from the chaos. That choice created a delicate balance. Brian could no longer appear directly on screen, but his presence still had to be felt in a way that respected both the character and the legacy behind him. And in F9, the Fast Saga, the film finds a subtle way to remind the audience that Brian is still part of this world. As the story reaches its final moments, the crew gathers for the familiar family barbecue. The mood is relaxed. The mission is over. For a moment, it feels like the chaos of the past few hours has finally faded away. Then, something happens. A car slowly pulls into the driveway. The camera never shows the driver. There's no dramatic reveal, no dialogue explaining who it might be. But for fans of the franchise, the meaning is immediately clear. That car belongs to Brian. It's a quiet moment, almost understated but emotionally powerful. Without needing to show his face or bring him physically into the story, the film acknowledges that Brian still exists within the world of the saga. He's still part of the family, still connected to the people gathered around that table. The moment works because it doesn't try to force a dramatic farewell or recreate something that can't truly be replaced. Instead, it treats Brian the same way the characters themselves do, as someone who will always be part of their lives, whether he's visible or not. In a franchise built on loyalty and family bonds, that small gesture carries enormous meaning. Because sometimes the strongest presence in a story isn't the one standing in the center of the frame. It's the one quietly arriving just as the family gathers together again. To really understand why F9, the Fast Saga, looks and feels the way it does, you have to step back and look at the road the franchise has traveled over the past 2 decades. Because what we're watching now isn't just the 9th chapter of a story. It's the result of a series that has constantly reinvented itself. When The Fast and the Furious first arrived in theaters, the concept was surprisingly simple. The film focused on underground street racing, a small group of drivers living on the edge of the law, and a police officer infiltrating their world. The stakes were personal, the environment was grounded, and the action revolved around fast cars tearing through city streets. No satellites. No global conspiracies. No world-ending technology. Just engines, rivalries, and loyalty. But as the years passed, the series began to shift. The early sequels experimented with different directions. Too Fast, Too Furious continued the story without Dom Toretto, focusing instead on Brian O'Connor's next chapter. Then, The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift took the franchise in a completely different direction, introducing a new setting, new characters, and a style centered around drifting culture. At the time, it almost felt like the saga was searching for its identity. But then something important happened. Years later, the story began reconnecting those scattered pieces. Characters returned, timelines overlapped. Familiar faces reappeared in ways that slowly pulled the franchise back together. The turning point arrived when the series embraced a larger vision, transforming from a racing drama into a full-scale action spectacle. The films began introducing bigger missions, more elaborate stunts, and threats that stretched far beyond the streets where the story originally began. What followed was a remarkable evolution. The crew expanded, the world grew larger, and the scale of the action exploded. Over time, the Fast and Furious saga built something few film series managed to achieve: a long-running cinematic universe where characters come and go, alliances shift, and events from earlier films continue shaping the story years later. That evolution wasn't always smooth. Actors stepped away and later returned. Characters disappeared only to reappear in surprising ways. Certain storylines were rewritten, expanded, or reframed as the franchise continued growing. Yet somehow, through all those changes, the series maintained a consistent emotional core. No matter how large the action became, the story always returned to the same idea that defined the original film: family. More than 20 years after the first movie introduced audiences to Dom, Brian, and the world of underground racing, the franchise now stands as one of Hollywood's longest-running action sagas. And by the time we reach F9, it's clear that this journey from street racing drama to globe-spanning spectacle has been anything but ordinary. It's a cinematic road trip that keeps getting bigger with every mile. One of the most unusual things about the Fast and Furious saga is the way its story refuses to stay fixed in one direction. In many long-running film franchises, continuity tends to follow a straight line. Events happen, consequences follow, and characters either move forward or disappear from the narrative entirely. But the world of F9, the Fast saga, operates very differently. Here, the past is constantly shifting. Characters who once seemed gone forever find their way back into the story. Events that appeared final suddenly gain new context years later. The timeline bends and stretches as the franchise continues expanding its mythology. In other words, the Fast universe is fluid. One of the clearest examples of this flexibility is Letty's storyline. When audiences first met Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez, she was one of the central figures in Dom's life. But at one point in the saga, the character was seemingly killed in an off-screen accident. For a while, that appeared to be the end of her story. But then the narrative shifted. Hints began appearing that Letty might still be alive. Eventually, she returned to the franchise, though with a twist. Her memory had been wiped, leaving her disconnected from the life she once shared with Dom and the crew. It was a surprising development, but it also demonstrated something important about how this series tells its story. Nothing is ever completely set in stone. Another powerful example comes from Han Lu. Fans believed Han had died during the events connected to the Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift, when a devastating crash appeared to bring his journey to an end. Yet years later, the saga revealed that his death had been staged as part of a larger plan. What once looked like a tragic final moment turned out to be something very different, another chapter waiting to be revealed. These twists might seem unusual at first, but they've become part of the franchise's identity. Instead of treating its past as something rigid, the Fast and Furious universe treats it as something expandable. Earlier events can be revisited, reinterpreted, or even completely reframed as new films add layers to the story. It's a storytelling style that allows the saga to keep evolving. Characters can return long after their apparent exits. Old conflicts can gain new meaning. Pieces of the timeline that once seemed disconnected can suddenly link together in unexpected ways. In a sense, the franchise treats its history the same way it treats its action sequences. Always moving forward, always pushing further, and always leaving the door open for the past to come racing back when you least expect it. When people look at F9, the Fast Saga, it's easy to focus on the explosions, the outrageous stunts, and the massive global stakes. But to really understand how the series reached this scale, you have to look at the journey the franchise has taken over the last 2 decades. Because the truth is, the Fast and Furious saga didn't start as a blockbuster giant, it started small. Back in 2001, The Fast and the Furious was essentially a crime story built around underground street racing. The film introduced audiences to a group of drivers living on the edge of the law, operating in the shadows of Los Angeles. The action was intense, but the world itself felt contained. Local rivalries, stolen electronics, and high-speed races through city streets. No one could have predicted what it would eventually become. As the series continued, the films began slowly expanding their scope. The sequels experimented with different characters, different locations, and different tones. Some entries pushed the racing culture further, while others began leaning into larger action set pieces. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of fading away like many early 2000s action franchises, Fast and Furious kept growing. Each new installment attracted bigger audiences. The scale of production increased. The action became more elaborate. What began as a street-level story gradually transformed into something much larger. A global franchise capable of competing with Hollywood's biggest blockbusters. The missions expanded beyond city streets. Now the characters were racing across continents, facing international criminal networks, battling threats that could affect entire governments and global security systems. The movies themselves evolved to match that scale. Budgets grew larger. Action sequences became more ambitious. The cast expanded into an ensemble filled with recognizable stars. With every new film, the franchise pushed further into blockbuster territory, and audiences kept showing up. That continued success turned Fast and Furious into one of the longest-running action series in modern cinema. Very few franchises managed to maintain momentum for more than 2 decades, yet this one has done exactly that. Part of the reason lies in its willingness to adapt. Instead of repeating the same formula forever, the saga continually reinvents itself, shifting from street racing drama to high-octane action spectacle while keeping the core idea of family intact. The result is something unique. A film series that started with small engines roaring through narrow streets has grown into a global cinematic powerhouse, capable of delivering some of the biggest action spectacles Hollywood has to offer. And by the time we reach the 9th chapter of the saga, it's clear that the franchise isn't just surviving, it's still accelerating. Every major action film usually revolves around one central object, something powerful enough to drive the entire story forward. It doesn't necessarily need to be deeply complex or emotionally meaningful on its own. Its purpose is simpler than that. It exists to push the characters into action. In F9, the Fast Saga, that object is known as Project Aries. Throughout the film, nearly every major conflict traces back to this single piece of technology. Different characters are chasing it, protecting it, stealing it, or trying to destroy it. The entire narrative orbit revolves around whoever manages to control the device first. In storytelling terms, this kind of object is often referred to as a MacGuffin, a plot device whose main purpose is to motivate the characters and keep the story moving. And Aries fits that role perfectly. Within the film's universe, Aries is presented as an incredibly dangerous digital weapon. Once activated and connected to a satellite network, the system could infiltrate and control nearly every computerized military system on the planet. Missiles, defense networks, surveillance systems, all of it could potentially fall under the command of a single operator. That possibility instantly raises the stakes of the entire story. Whoever gains control of Aries wouldn't just possess a powerful tool. They would have access to the kind of authority capable of reshaping global power structures. And that's exactly why so many different forces are pursuing it. Jakob wants the device as part of his larger mission. Otto sees it as the ultimate key to global dominance. Meanwhile, Dom and the crew are racing against time to stop the system from ever being fully activated. The result is a constant chase. Every action sequence, every confrontation, every major decision in the film is tied to the same objective: control the Aries system before someone else does. But interestingly, the film never spends much time exploring the deeper mechanics of how Aries actually works, and it doesn't really need to. The device functions primarily as a catalyst, a reason for the characters to travel across continents, engage in massive battles, and confront long-buried conflicts along the way. In other words, Aries isn't the true heart of the story. It's the spark that ignites it, because beneath all the technology and global stakes, the real drama of the film still comes from the relationships between the characters themselves, especially the long-standing conflict between Dom and his brother Jakob. The device may drive the action, but the people behind the wheel are what make the journey matter.